Here we come a-wassailing among the leaves so green. Here we come a-wandering so fair to be seen. Love and joy come to you, and to you a wassail too. And God bless you and send you a happy new year. And God send you a happy new year.
Welcome to the 11th day of CraftLit. Today for your CraftLit Christmas compilation, we have A Rhyme for Christmas from 1911, The Errors of Santa Claus from 1917, To An Old Fogey, Vera's First Christmas Adventure, 1907, Here We Come a-Wassailing, 1850, What Christmas Is as We Grow Older, St. Nicholas, The House of the Seven Santas from 1908, and A Christmas Sermon. And that'll all be followed up by The Night After Christmas from 1907, Her Birthday Dream from 1916, A Letter from Santa Claus, The Philanthropist Christmas from 1913, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, A Visit from St. Nicholas from 1823, and Away in a Manger. If you haven't listened to the day one, the first day of CraftLit, you may want to go do that. All of the information on how and where to find other episodes will be in that opening. However, the short version is, if you're watching/listening on YouTube, you can get the playlist on our YouTube channel. And if you are looking at show notes and listening to this as an actual audio podcast, if you look in the show notes, you will see not only links to all the previous episodes, but time codes telling you where to fast wind to or rewind to be able to listen to exactly the right story that you want to listen to. All right, here we go.
Section 17 of The Wit and Humor of America, Volume 7. The Rhyme for Christmas by John Challing. If Browning only were here, this Yulish time of the year, this mulish time of the year, stubbornly still refusing to add to the rhymes we've been using since the first Christmas glee, one might say chantingly rendered by rudest hinds of the pelt-clad shepherding kinds, who didn't know song from B-U-double-L's foot. Pah! Haply the old Egyptian ptah, though I'd hardly wager a baw, B, or a bumble for that, and that's flat. But the thing that I want to get at is a rhyme for Christmas. Nay, 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 not isthmus. The T and the H sounds covertly are gnawing the nice oracular senses until one may hear them gnaw. And the terminal, too, for mass is muss, so that will not do for us. Try for it, sigh for it, cry for it, die for it. Oh, but if Browning were here to apply for it, he'd rhyme you Christmas. He'd make a mist pass over something or other, or find you the rhyme's very brother, in lovers that kissed fast to baffle the moon as he lose the T final, in fast as it blended with two marked the spinal, Elysion tip-clipped as exquisitely nicely, and hyper-exactingly sliced to precisely the extremest technical need. Or he'd twist glass, or he'd have a kissed lass, or shake neath our noses some great giant fist mass. No matter, if Robert were here, he could do it, though it took us till Christmas next year to see through it. End of The Rhyme for Christmas.
The Errors of Santa Claus by Stephen Leacock. It was Christmas Eve. The Browns, who lived in the adjoining house, had been dining with the Joneses. Brown and Jones were sitting over wine and walnuts at the table. The others had gone upstairs. "What are you giving to your boy for Christmas?" asked Brown. "A train," said Jones. "New kind of thing, automatic." "Let's have a look at it," said Brown. Jones fetched a parcel from the sideboard and began unwrapping it. "Ingenious thing, isn't it?" he said. "Goes on its own rails. Queer how kids love to play with trains, isn't it?" "Yes," assented Brown. How are the rails fixed? Wait, I'll show you, said Jones. Just help me to shove these dinner things aside and roll back the cloth. There. See? You lay the rails like that and fasten them at the ends, so. Oh, yes, I catch on. Makes a grade, doesn't it? Just the thing to amuse a child, isn't it? I got Willie a toy airplane. I know they're great. I got Edwin one on his birthday. But I thought I'd get him a train this time. I told him Santa Claus was going to bring him something altogether new this time. Edwin, of course, believes in Santa Claus absolutely. Say, look at this locomotive, would you? It has a spring coiled up inside the firebox. Wind her up, said Brown, with great interest. Let's see her go. All right, said Jones. Just pile up 2 or 3 plates or something to lean the end of the rails on. There, notice the way it buzzes before it starts. Isn't that a great thing for a kid, eh? Yes, said Brown. And say, see this little string to pull the whistle. By gad, it toots, eh? Just like real. Now then, Brown, Jones went on, you hitch on those cars and I'll start her. I'll be engineer, eh? Half an hour later, Brown and Jones were still playing trains on the dining-room table. But their wives upstairs in the drawing-room hardly noticed their absence. They were too much interested. Oh, I think it's perfectly sweet, said Mrs. Brown. Just the loveliest doll I've seen in years. I must get one like it for Ovina. Won't Clarice be perfectly enchanted? Yes, answered Mrs. Jones, and then she'll have all the fun of arranging the dresses. Children love that so much. Look, there are 3 little dresses with the doll. Aren't they cute? All cut out and ready to stitch together. Oh, how perfectly lovely, exclaimed Mrs. Brown. I think the mauve one would suit the doll best, don't you, with such golden hair? Only don't you think it would make it much nicer to turn back the collar, so, and to put a little band, so? What a good idea, said Mrs. Jones. Do let's try it. Just wait, I'll get a needle in a minute. I'll tell Clarice that Santa Claus sewed it himself. The child believes in Santa Claus absolutely. And half an hour later, Mrs. Jones and Mrs. Brown were so busy stitching dolls' clothes that they could not hear the roaring of the little train up and down the dining table, and had no idea what the 4 children were doing. Nor did the children miss their mothers. Dandy, aren't they? Edwin Jones was saying to little Willie Brown as they sat in Edwin's bedroom. 100 in a box, with cork tips, and see, an amber mouthpiece that fits into a little case at the side. Good present for Dad, eh? Fine, said Willie appreciatively. I'm giving Father cigars. I know, I thought of cigars too. Men always like cigars and cigarettes. You can't go wrong on them. Say, would you like to try 1 or 2 of these cigarettes? We can take them from the bottom. You'll like them. They're Russian, away ahead of Egyptian. Thanks, answered Willie. I'd like one immensely. I only started smoking last spring, on my 12th birthday. I think a feller's a fool to begin smoking cigarettes too soon, don't you? It stunts him. I waited till I was 12. Me too, said Edwin, as they lighted their cigarettes. In fact, I wouldn't buy them now if it weren't for Dad. I simply had to give him something from Santa Claus. He believes in Santa Claus absolutely, you know. And while this was going on, Clarice was showing little Ulvina the absolutely lovely little bridge set that she had got for her mother. Aren't these markers perfectly charming? Said Ulvina. And don't you love this little Dutch design? Or is it Flemish, darling? Dutch, said Clarice. Isn't it quaint? And aren't these the dearest little things for putting the money in when you play? I needn't have got them with it. They'd have sold the rest separately. But I think it's too utterly slow playing without money, don't you? Oh, abominably, shuddered Ulvina. But your mamma never plays for money, does she? Mamma? Oh, gracious, no. Mamma's far too slow for that. But I shall tell her that Santa Claus insisted on putting in the little money boxes. I suppose she believes in Santa Claus just as my mamma does. Oh, absolutely, said Clarice, and added, What if we play a little game? With a double dummy, the French way, or Norwegian scat, if you like. That only needs 2. All right, agreed Ulvina. And in a few minutes they were deep in a game of cards with a little pile of pocket money beside them. About half an hour later, all the members of the two families were again in the drawing-room. But of course, nobody said anything about the presents. In any case, they were all too busy looking at the beautiful big Bible with maps in it that the Joneses had brought to give to Grandfather. They all agreed that, with the help of it, Grandfather could hunt up any place in Palestine in a moment, day or night. But upstairs, away upstairs in a sitting room of his own, Grandfather Jones was looking with an affectionate eye at the presents that stood beside him. There was a beautiful whiskey decanter with silver filigree outside and whiskey inside for Jones, and for the little boy a big nickel-plated Jew's harp. Later on, far in the night, the person, or the influence, or whatever it is called Santa Claus, took all the presents and placed them in the people's stockings. And, being blind as he always has been, he gave the wrong things to the wrong people. In fact, he gave them just as indicated above. But the next day, in the course of Christmas morning, the situation straightened itself out, just as it always does. Indeed, by 10 o'clock, Brown and Jones were playing with the train, and Mrs. Brown and Mrs. Jones were making dolls' clothes, and the boys were smoking cigarettes, and Clarice and Ulvina were playing cards for their pocket money. And upstairs, away up, Grandfather was drinking whiskey and playing the Jew's harp. And so Christmas, just as it always does, turned out all right after all. End of The Errors of Santa Claus by Stephen Leacock. Read and recorded by William Kuhn.
To an Old Fogey Who Contends That Christmas is Played Out by Owen Seaman, recorded for LibriVox.org by Corrie Samuel. O frankly bald and obviously stout, and so you find that Christmas as a fate, dispassionately viewed, is getting out of date. The studied festal air is overdone, the humour of it grows a little thin. You fail, in fact, to gather where the fun comes in. Visions of very heavy meals arise that tend to make your organism shiver. Roast beef that irks, and pies that agonise the liver. Those pies, at which you annually wince, hearing the tale how happy months will follow, proportioned to the total mass of mince you swallow. Visions of youth, whose reverence is scant, who with the brutal verve of boyhood's prime insist on being taken to the pantomime. Of infants sitting up extremely late, who run you on toboggans down the stair, or make you fetch a rug and simulate a bear. This takes your faultless trousers at the knees, the other hurts them rather more behind, and both effect a fracture in your ease of mind. My good dyspeptic, this will never do. Your weary withers must be sadly wrung, yet once I well believe that even you were young. Time was when you devoured, like other boys, plum pudding sequent on a turkey hen, with cracker mottos hinting of the joys of men. Time was when mid the maidens you would pull the fiery raisin with profound delight, when sprigs of mistletoe seemed beautiful and right. Old Christmas changes not. Long, long ago he won the treasure of eternal youth. Yours is the dotage, if you want to know the truth. Come now, I'll cure your case and ask no fee. Make others' happiness this once your own. All else may pass. That joy can never be outgrown. End of poem. Merry Christmas.
Vera's First Christmas Adventure by Arnold Bennett. Read by Andy Minter. 1. 5 days before Christmas, Cheswardine came home to his wife from a week's sojourn in London on business. Vera, in her quality of the best-dressed woman in Bursley, met him on the doorstep, or thereabouts, of their charming but childless home, attired in a tea-gown that would have ravished a far less impressionable male than her husband, while he, in his quality of a prosaic and flourishing earthenware manufacturer, pretended to take the tea-gown as a matter of course, and gave her the sober, solid kiss of a man who has been married 6 years, and is getting used to it. Still, the tea-gown had pleased him, and by certain secret symptoms Vera knew that it had pleased him. She hoped much from that tea-gown. She hoped that he had come home in a more pacific temper than he had shown when he left her, and that she would carry her point after all. Now, naturally, when a husband in easy circumstances, the possessor of a pretty and pampered wife, spends a week in London and returns 5 days before Christmas, certain things are rightly and properly to be expected from him. It would need outstanding courage, an amazing lack of a sense of the amenity of conjugal existence in such a husband, to enable him to disappoint such reasonable expectations. And Cheswardine, though capable of pulling the curb very tight on the caprices of his wife, was a highly decent fellow. He had no intention to disappoint. He knew his duty. So that, during afternoon tea, with the tea-gown, in a cosy corner of the great Chippendale drawing-room, he began to unfasten a small wooden case, which he had brought into the house in his own hand, opened it with considerable precaution, making a fine mess of packing-stuff on the carpet, and gradually drew to light a pair of vases of Venetian glass. He put them on the mantelpiece. "There," he said, proudly, and with a virtuous air. They were obviously costly antique vases, exquisite in form, exquisite in the graduated tints of their pale blue and rose. 17th century, he said. "They're very nice," Vera agreed, with a show of enthusiasm. "What are they for?" "Your Christmas present," Cheswardine explained, and added, "my dear." "Oh, Stephen," she murmured. A kiss on these occasions is only just, and Cheswardine had one. "Duvines told me they were quite unique," he said modestly, "and I believe them." You might imagine that a pair of Venetian vases of the 17th century, stated by Duvines to be unique, would have satisfied a woman who had a generous dress allowance and lacked absolutely nothing that was essential. But Vera was not satisfied. She was, on the contrary, profoundly disappointed. For the presence of those vases proved that she had not carried her point. They deprived her of hope. The unpleasantness before Cheswardine went to London had been more or less apropos of a Christmas present. Vera had seen in Bostock's vast emporium, in the neighbouring town of Hanbridge, a music stool, in the style known as Art Nouveau, which had enslaved her fancy. She had taken her husband to see it, and it had not enslaved her husband's fancy in the slightest degree. It was made in light woods, and the woods were curved and twisted as though they had recently spent 7 years in a purgatory for sinful trees. Here and there in the design, onyx stones had been set in the wood. The seat itself was beautifully soft. What captured Vera was chiefly the fact that it did not open at the top, as most elaborate music stools do, but at either side. You pressed a button, onyx, and the panel fell down, displaying your music in little compartments, ready to hand. And the eastern moiety of the music stool was for piano pieces, and the western moiety for songs. In short, it was the last word of music stools. Nothing could possibly be newer. But Cheswardine did not like it, and did not conceal his opinion. He argued that it would not go with the Chippendale furniture, and Vera said that all beautiful things went together, and Cheswardine admitted that they did, rather dryly. You see, they took the matter seriously because the house was their hobby. They were always changing its interior, which was more than they could have done for a child, even if they had had one. And Cheswardine's finer and soberer taste was always fighting against Vera's predilection for the novel and the bizarre. Apart from clothes, Vera had not much more than the taste of a mouse. They did not quarrel in Bostock's. Indeed, they did not quarrel anywhere. But after Vera had suggested that he might at any rate humour her by giving her the music stool for a Christmas present, she seemed to think that this would somehow help it to go with the Chippendale, and Cheswardine had politely but firmly declined. There had been a certain coolness and quite 6 tears. Vera had caused it to be understood that even if Cheswardine was not interested in music, and even if he did hate music, and did call the Broadwood ebony grand ugly, that was no reason why she should be deprived of a pretty and original music stool that would keep her music tidy, and that would be hers. As for it not going with the Chippendale, that was simply an excuse, etc. Hence it is not surprising that the Venetian vases of the 17th century left Vera cold, and that the domestic prospects for Christmas were a little cold. However, Vera, with wifely and submissive tact, made the best of things, and that evening she began to decorate the hall, dining-room and drawing-room with holly and mistletoe. Before the pair retired to rest, the true Christmas feeling, slightly tinged with a tender melancholy, permeated the house, and the servants were growing excited in advance. The servants weren't going to have a dinner party with crackers and port and a table centre unmatched in the Five Towns. The servants weren't going to invite their friends to an evening's jollity. The servants were merely going to work somewhat harder and have somewhat less sleep. But such is the magical effect of holly and mistletoe, twined round picture cords and hung under chandeliers, that the excitement of the servants was entirely pleasurable. And as Vera shut the bedroom door, she said, with a delightful, forgiving smile, "I saw a lovely cigar cabinet at Bostock's yesterday." "Oh," said Cheswardine, touched. He had no cigar cabinet, and he wanted one, and Vera knew that he wanted one. And Vera slept in the sweet consciousness of her thoughtful wifeliness. The next morning at breakfast, Cheswardine demanded, "Getting pretty hard up, aren't you, Maria?" He called her Maria when he wished to be arch. "Well," she said, "as a matter of fact, I am. What with the—" And he gave her a £5 note. It happened so every year. He provided her with the money to buy him a Christmas present. But it is, I hope, unnecessary to say that the connection between her present to him and the money he furnished was never crudely mentioned. She made an opportunity, before he left for the works, to praise the Venetian vases, and she insisted that he should wrap up well, because he was showing signs of one of his bad colds. 2. In the early afternoon, she went to Bostock's Emporium at Hanbridge to buy the cigar cabinet and a few domestic trifles. Bostock's is a good shop. I do not say that it has the classic and serene dignity of Brunt's over the way, where one orders one's dining-room suites and one's frocks for the January dances, but it is a good shop, and one of the chief glories of the Paris of the Five Towns. It has frontages in 3 streets, and it might be called the shop of the 100 windows. You can buy pretty nearly anything at Bostock's, from an Art Nouveau music stool up to the highest cheese, for there is a provision department. You can't get cheese at Brunt's. Vera made her uninteresting purchases first in the basement, and then she went upstairs to the special Christmas department, which certainly was wonderful. A blaze and splendour of electric light, a glitter of gilded iridescent toys and knick-knacks, a smiling, excited, pushing multitude of faces, young and old, and the cashiers in their cages, gathering in money as fast as they could lay their tired hands on it. A joyous, brilliant scene, calculated to bring soft tears of satisfaction to the board of directors that presided over Bostock's. It was a record Christmas for Bostock's. The electric cars were thundering over the frozen streets in all the Five Towns to bring customers to Bostock's. Children dreamt of Bostock's. Fathers went to scoff, and remained to pay. Brunt's was not exactly alarmed, for nothing could alarm Brunt's, but there was just a sort of suspicion of something in the air at Brunt's that did not make for odious self-conceit. People seemed to become intoxicated when they went into Bostock's, to close their heads in a frenzy of buying. And there the Art Nouveau music stool stood in the corner, where Vera had originally seen it. She approached it, not thinking of the terrible danger. The compartments for music lay invitingly open. £4 9 and 6, Mrs. Cheswardine, said a shop-walker who knew her. She stopped to finger it. Well, of course everybody is acquainted with that peculiar ecstasy that undoubtedly does overtake you in good shops sometimes, especially at Christmas. I prefer to call it ecstasy rather than intoxication, but I have heard it called even drunkenness. It is a magnificent and overwhelming experience, like good wine. A blind instinct seizes your reason and throws her out of the window of your soul, and then assumes entire control of the volitional machinery. You listen to no arguments, you care for no consequences, you want a thing, you must have it, you do have it. Vera was caught unawares by this magnificent and overwhelming experience, just as she stooped to finger the music-stool. A fig for the cigar-cabinet, a fig for her husband's objections. After all, she was a grown-up woman, 29 or 30, and entitled to a certain freedom. She was not and would not be a slave. It would look perfect in the drawing-room. "I'll take it," she said. "Yes, Mrs. Jeswardine, a unique thing, quite unique. Penkethman." And Vera followed Penkethman to a cash desk and received half a guinea out of a £5 note. "I want it carefully packed," said Vera. "Yes, ma'am. It will be delivered in the morning." She was just beginning to realise that she had been under the sinister influence of the ecstasy, and that she had not bought the cigar cabinet, and that she had practically no more money, and that Stephen's rule against credit was the strictest of all his rules, when she caught sight of Mr. Charles Woodruff buying toys, doubtless for his nephews and nieces. Mr. Woodruff was the bachelor friend of the family. He had loved Vera before Stephen loved her, and he was still attached to her. Stephen and he were chums of the most advanced kind. Why, Stephen and Vera thought nothing of bickering in front of Mr. Woodruff, who rated them both and sided with neither. "Hello," said Woodruff, flushing and moving his long, clumsy limbs when she touched him on the shoulder. "I'm just buying a few toys." She helped him to buy toys, and then he asked her to go and have tea with him at the newly opened Sub Rosa Tea Rooms in Machin Street. She agreed, and in passing the music-stool gave a small parcel which she was carrying to Penkethman, and told him he might as well put it in the music-stool. She was glad to have tea with Charlie Woodruff. It would distract her, prevent her from thinking. The ecstasy had almost died out, and she had a violent desire not to think. 3. A terrible blow fell upon her the next morning. Stephen had one of his bad colds, one of his worst. The mere cold she could have supported with fortitude, but he was forced to remain indoors, and his presence in the house she could not support with fortitude. The music-stool would be sure to arrive before lunch, and he would be there to see it arrive. The ecstasy had fully expired now, and she had more leisure to think than she wanted. She could not imagine what mad instinct had compelled her to buy the music-stool. Once out of the shop, these instincts are always difficult to imagine. She knew that Stephen would be angry. He might perhaps go to the length of returning the music-stool whence it came. For though she was a pretty and pampered woman, Stephen had a way, in the last resort, of being master of his own house, and she could not even placate him with the gift of a cigar-cabinet. She could not buy a 5-guinea cigar-cabinet with 10 and 6. She had no other money in the world. She never had money, yet money was always running through her fingers. Stephen treated her generously, gave her an ample allowance, but he would under no circumstances permit credit, nor would he pay her allowance in advance. She had nothing to expect till the new year. She attended to his cold, and telephoned to the works for a clerk to come up, and she refrained from telling Stephen that he must have been very careless while in London to catch a cold like that. Her self-denial in this respect surprised Stephen, but he put it down to the beneficent influence of Christmas and the Venetian vases. Bostock's pair-horse van arrived before the garden gate earlier than her worst fears had anticipated, and Bostock's men were evidently in a tremendous hurry that morning. In quite an abnormally small number of seconds the wooden case containing the fragile music-stool was lying in the inner hall, waiting to be unpacked. Having signed the delivery book, Vera stood staring at the accusatory package. Stephen was lounging over the dining-room fire, perhaps dozing. She would have the thing swiftly transported upstairs and hidden in an attic for a time. But just then Stephen popped out of the dining-room. Stephen's masculine curiosity had been aroused by the advent of Bostock's van. He had observed the incoming of the package from the window, and he had ventured to the hall to inspect it. The event had roused him wonderfully from the heavy torpor which a cold induces. He wore a dressing-gown, the pockets of which bulged with handkerchiefs. "You oughtn't to be out here, Stephen," said his wife. "Nonsense," he said. "Why, upon my soul, this steam heat is warmer than the dining-room fire." Vera, silenced by the voice of truth, could not reply. Stephen bent his great height to inspect the package. It was an appetizing Christmas package. Straw escaped from between its ribs, and it had an air of being filled with something at once large and delicate. "Oh," observed Stephen humorously. "Ah, so this is it, is it? Ah, oh, very good." And he walked round it. How on earth had he learnt that she had bought it? She had not mentioned the purchase to Mr. Woodruff. "Yes, Stephen," she said timidly. "That's it, and I hope—" "It ought to hold a tidy few cigars, that ought," remarked Stephen complacently. He took it for the cigar cabinet. She paused, struck. She had to make up her mind in an instant. "Oh, yes," she murmured. "1,000? Yes, 1,000, she said. "I thought so," murmured Stephen. I mustn't kiss you because I've got a cold," said he. "But all the same, I'm awfully obliged, Vera. Suppose we have it open now, eh? Then we could decide where it is to go, and I could put my cigars in it." "Oh, no," she protested. "Oh, no, Stephen, that's not fair. It mustn't be opened before Christmas morning." "But I gave you my vases yesterday." "That's different," she said. "Christmas is Christmas." "Oh, very well," he yielded. "That's all right, my dear." Then he began to sniff. "There's a deuced odd smell from it," he said. "Perhaps it's the wood," she faltered. "I hope it isn't," he said. "I expect it's the straw. A deuced odd smell. We'll have the thing put in the side hall next to the clock. It'll be out of the way there, and I can come and gaze at it when I feel depressed. Eh, Maria?" He was undoubtedly charmed at the prospect of owning so large and precious a cigar cabinet. Considering that the parcel which he had given to Penkethman to put in the music-stool comprised a half-pound of Bostock's very ripest Gorgonzola cheese, bought at the cook's special request, the smell which proceeded from the mysterious inwards of the packing-case did not surprise Vera at all, but it disconcerted her none the less, and she wondered how she could get the cheese out. For 30 hours the smell from the unopened packing-case waxed in vigour and strength. Stephen's cold grew worse and prevented him from appreciating its full beauty, but he savoured enough of it to induce him to compare it facetiously with the effluvium of a dead rat, and he said several times that Bostocks really ought to use better straw. He was frequently to be seen in the hall, gloating over his cigar cabinet. Once he urged Vera to have it opened and so get rid of the straw, but she refused, and found the nerve to tell him that he was exaggerating the odour. She was at a loss what to do. She could not get up in the middle of the night and unpack the package and hide its guilty secret. Indeed, to unpack the package would bring about her ruin instantly, for, the package unpacked, Stephen would naturally expect to see the cigar cabinet. And so the hours crept on to Christmas and Vera's undoing. She gave herself a headache. It was just 30 hours after the arrival of the package when Mr. Woodruff dropped in for tea. Stephen was asleep in the dining-room, which apartment he particularly affected during his colds. Woodruff was shown into the drawing-room, where Vera was having her headache. Vera brightened. In fact, she suddenly grew very bright, and she gave Woodruff tea, and took some herself, and Woodruff passed an enjoyable 20 minutes. The 2 Venetian vases were on the mantelpiece. Vera rose into ecstasies about them, and called upon Charlie Woodruff to rise too. He got up from his chair to examine the vases, which Vera had placed close together side by side at the corner of the mantelpiece nearest to him. Vera and Woodruff also stood close together side by side, and just as Woodruff was about to handle the vases, Vera knocked his arm. His arm collided with one vase, that vase collided with the next, and both fell to earth, to the hard, unfeeling, unyielding tiles of the hearth. 4. They were smashed to atoms. Vera screamed. She screamed twice and ran out of the room. "Stephen, Stephen!" she cried hysterically. "Charlie has broken my vases, both of them. It is too bad of him. He's really too clumsy." There was a terrific pother. Stephen wakened violently, and in a moment all three were staring ineffectually at the 1,000 crystal fragments on the hearth. "But—" began Charlie Woodruff, and that was all he did say. He and Vera and Stephen had been friends since infancy, so she had the right not to conceal her feelings before him. Stephen had the same right, and they both exercised it. "But—" began Charlie again. "Oh, never mind." Stephen stopped him curtly. "Accidents can't be helped." "I shall get another pair," said Woodruff. "No, you won't," replied Stephen. "You can't. There isn't another pair in the world. See?" The two men simultaneously perceived that Vera was weeping. She was very pretty in tears, but that did not prevent the masculine world from feeling awkward and self-conscious. Charlie had notions about going out and burying himself. "Come, Vera, come," her husband enjoined, blowing his nose with unnecessary energy, bad as his cold was. I like those vases more than anything you've ever given me," Vera blubbered charmingly, patting her eyes. Stephen glanced at Woodruff, as who should say, "Well, my boy, you uncork those tears, I'll leave you to deal with them. You see, I'm an invalid in a dressing-gown. I leave you," and went. No, but look here, I say," Charlie Woodruff expostulated to Vera when he was alone with her. He often started an expostulation with that singular phrase. "I'm awfully sorry. I don't know how it happened. You must let me give you something else." Vera shook her head. "No," she said, "I wanted Stephen awfully to give me that music stool that I told you about a fortnight ago. But he gave me the vases instead, and I liked them ever so much better." "I shall give you the music stool. If you wanted it a fortnight ago, you want it now. It won't make up for the vases, of course, but—" No, said Vera positively. "Why not? I do not wish you to give me anything. It wouldn't be quite nice," Vera insisted. "But I give you something every Christmas." "Do you?" asked Vera innocently. "Yes, and you and Stephen give me something. Besides, Stephen doesn't quite like the music stool." "What's that got to do with it? You like it. I'm giving it to you, not him. I shall go over to Bostock's tomorrow morning and get it." "I forbid you to." "I shall." Woodruff departed. Within 5 minutes the Cheswardine coachman was driving off in the dog-cart to Hanbridge, with the packing-case in the back of the cart, and a note. He brought back the cigar-cabinet. Stephen had not stirred from the dining-room, afraid to encounter a tearful wife. Presently his wife came into the dining-room, bearing the vast load of the cigar-cabinet in her delicate arms. "I thought it might amuse you to fill it with your cigars, just to pass the time," she said. Stephen's thought was, well, women take the cake. It was a thought that occurs frequently to the husbands of Veras. There was ripe gorgonzola at dinner. Stephen met it as one meets a person whom one fancies one has met somewhere, but cannot remember where. The next afternoon the music stool came for the second time into the house. Charlie brought it in his dog-cart. It was unpacked ostentatiously by the radiant Vera. What could Stephen say in depreciation of this gift from their oldest and best friend? As a fact, he could and did say a great deal, but he said it when he happened to be all alone in the drawing-room, and had observed the appalling way in which the music stool did not go with the Chippendale. "Look at the thing," he exclaimed to himself. "Look at it!" However, the Christmas dinner-party was a brilliant success, and after it Vera sat on the Art Nouveau music-stool and twittered songs, and what with her being so attractive and bird-like, and what with the Christmas feeling in the air, well, Stephen resigned himself to the music-stool. End of Vera's First Christmas Adventure by Arnold Bennett.
If you have a book lover or bibliophile in your life, then consider gifting them a premium membership. Our premium membership gives you access to book parties, watch parties, Discord access, and all our premium books, our premium audio, and occasionally video content, all for an entire year. Go to craftlit.gumroad.com. That's CRAFT as in Tom, LIT, .gumroad, GUM as in Mary, ROAD as in dog.com, and gift someone a premium membership, or go to craftlit.com/premium to get the membership for yourself.
What Christmas Is as We Grow Older, by Charles Dickens. Time was, with most of us, when Christmas Day, encircling all our limited world like a magic ring, left nothing out for us to miss or seek. Bound together all our home enjoyments, affections, and hopes, grouped everything and every one around the Christmas fire, and made the little picture shining in our bright young eyes complete. Time came, perhaps all so soon, when our thoughts overleaped that narrow boundary, when there was someone, very dear we thought then, very beautiful and absolutely perfect, wanting to the fullness of our happiness, when we were wanting too, or we thought so, which did just as well, at the Christmas hearth by which that same one sat, and when we intertwined with every wreath and garland of our life that someone's name. That was the time for the bright visionary Christmases which have long arisen from us to show faintly, after summer rain, in the palest edges of the rainbow. That was the time for the beatified enjoyment of the things that were to be, never were, and yet the things that were so real in our resolute hope that it would be hard to say now what realities achieved since have been stronger. What, did that Christmas never really come, when we and the priceless pearl who was our young choice were received, after the happiest of totally impossible marriages, by the two united families previously at daggers, drawn on our account? When brothers and sisters-in-law, who had always been rather cool to us before our relationship was effected, perfectly doted on us, and when fathers and mothers overwhelmed us with unlimited incomes? Was that Christmas dinner never really eaten, after which we arose and generously and eloquently rendered honour to our late rival, present in the company, then and there exchanging friendship and forgiveness, and founding an attachment not to be surpassed in Greek or Roman story, which subsisted until death? Has that same rival long ceased to care for that same priceless pearl, and married for money and become usurious? Above all, do we really know now that we should probably have been miserable if we had won and worn the pearl, and that we are better without her? That Christmas, when we had recently achieved so much fame, when we had been carried in triumph somewhere for doing something great and good, when we had won an honoured and ennobled name, and arrived and were received at home in a shower of tears of joy. Is it possible that that Christmas has not come yet? And is our life here, at the best, so constituted, that, pausing as we advance at such a noticeable milestone in the track of this great birthday, that we look back on the things that never were, as naturally and full as gravely as on the things that have been and are gone, or have been and still are? If it be so, and so it seems to be, must we come to the conclusion that life is little better than a dream, and little worth the loves and strivings that we crowd into it? No, far be such miscalled philosophy from us, dear reader, on Christmas Day. Nearer and closer to our hearts be the Christmas spirit, which is the spirit of active usefulness, perseverance, cheerful discharge of duty, kindness, and forbearance. It is in the last virtues especially that we are, or should be, strengthened by the unaccompanied visions of our youth. For who shall say that they are not our teachers to deal gently even with the impalpable nothings of the earth? Therefore, as we grow older, let us be more thankful that the circle of our Christmas associations, and of the lessons that they bring, expands. Let us welcome every one of them, and summon them to take their places by the Christmas hearth. Welcome, old aspirations, glittering creatures of an ardent fancy, to your shelter underneath the holly. We know you, and have not outlived you yet. Welcome, old projects and old loves, however fleeting, to your nooks among the steadier lights that burn around us. Welcome, all that was ever real to our hearts, and for the earnestness that made you real, thanks to heaven. Do we build no Christmas castles in the clouds now? Let our thoughts, fluttering like butterflies among these flowers of children, bear witness. Before this boy there stretches out a future, brighter than we ever looked on in our old romantic time, but bright with honor and with truth. Around this little head, on which the sunny curls lie heaped, the Graces sport as prettily, as airily, as when there was no scythe within the reach of time to shear away the curls of our first love. Upon another girl's face near it, placider but smiling bright, a quiet and contented little face, we see home fairly written. Shining from the word as rays shine from a star, we see how, when our graves are old, other hopes than ours are young, other hearts than ours are moved, how other ways are smoothed, how other happiness blooms, ripens, and decays. No, not decays, for other homes and other bands of children, not yet in being or for ages yet to be, arise and bloom and ripen to the end of all. Welcome everything. Welcome alike what has been, and what never was, and what we hope may be, to your shelter underneath the holly, to your places around the Christmas fire, where what is sits open-hearted. In yonder shadow do we see obtruding furtively upon the blaze an enemy's face. By Christmas Day we do forgive him. If the injury he has done us may admit to such companionship, let him come here and take his place. If otherwise, unhappily, let him go hence, assured that we will never injure nor accuse him. On this day we shut out nothing. Pause, says a low voice. Nothing? Think. On Christmas Day we will shut out from our fireside nothing. Not the shadow of a vast city where the withered leaves are lying deep, the voice replies. Not the shadow that darkens the whole globe. Not the shadow of the city of the dead. Not even that. Of all days in the year, we will turn our faces towards that city upon Christmas Day, and from its silent hosts bring those we loved among us. City of the dead, in the blessed name wherein we are gathered together at this time, and in the presence that is here among us according to the promise, we will receive and not dismiss thy people who are dear to us. Yes, we can look upon these children angels that alight so solemnly, so beautifully among the living children by the fire, and can bear to think how they departed from us. Entertaining angels unawares, as the patriarchs did, the playful children are unconscious of their guests, but we can see them, can see a radiant arm around one favorite neck, as if there were a tempting of that child away. Among the celestial figures there is one, a poor misshapen boy on earth, of a glorious beauty now, of whom his dying mother said it grieved her much to leave him here alone, for so many years as it was likely would elapse before he came to her, being such a little child. But he went quickly, and was laid upon her breast, and in her hand she leads him. There was a gallant boy who fell far away upon a burning sand beneath a burning sun, and said, "Tell them at home, with my last love, how much I could have wished to kiss them once, but that I died contented, and have done my duty." Or there was another, over whom they read the words, "Therefore we commit his body to the deep," and so consigned him to the lonely ocean, and sailed on. And there was another who lay down to his rest in the dark shadow of great forests, and on earth awoke no more. Oh, shall they not from sand and sea and forest be brought home at such a time? There was a dear girl, almost a woman, never to be one, who made a morning Christmas in a house of joy, and went her trackless way to the silent city. Do we recollect her, worn out, faintly whispering what could not be heard, then falling into the last sleep for weariness? Oh, look upon her now! Oh, look upon her beauty, her serenity, her changeless youth, her happiness! The daughter of Jairus was recalled to life to die, but she, more blessed, has heard the same voice, saying unto her, Arise forever. We had a friend, who was a friend from early days, with whom we often pictured the changes that were to come upon our lives, and merrily imagined how we would speak and walk and think and talk when we came to be old. His destined habitation in the city of the dead received him in his prime. Shall he be shut out from our Christmas remembrance? Would his love have so excluded us? Lost friend, lost child, lost parent, sister, brother, husband, wife, we will not so discard you. You shall hold your cherished places in our Christmas hearts, and by our Christmas fires, and in the season of immortal hope, and on the birthday of immortal mercy, we will shut out nothing. The winter sun goes down over town and village. On the sea it makes a rosy path, as if the sacred tread were fresh upon the water. A few more moments, and it sinks, and night comes on, and lights begin to sparkle in the prospect. On the hillside beyond the shapelessly diffused town, and in the quiet keeping of the trees that gird the village steeple, remembrances are cut in stone, planted in common flowers, growing in grass, entwined with lowly brambles around many a mound of earth. In town and village there are doors and windows closed against the weather. There are flaming logs heaped high, there are joyful faces, there is healthy music of voices. Be all ungentleness and harm excluded from the temples of the household gods, but be those remembrances admitted tender encouragement. They are of the time and all its comforting and peaceful reassurances, and of the history that reunited even upon earth the living and the dead, and of the broad beneficence and goodness that too many men have tried to tear into narrow shreds.
Fireside Christmas Short Stories by Various. Saint Nicholas by Horatio Alger, Jr. Recording by Claudia Salto. In the far-off polar seas, far beyond the Hebrides, where the icebergs, towering high, seem to pierce the wintry sky, and the fur-clad Eskimo glides in sledges o'er the snow, dwells Saint Nick, the merry wight, patron saint of Christmas night. Solid walls of massive ice, bearing many a quaint device, flanked by graceful turrets twain, clear as clearest porcelain, bearing at a lofty height Christ's pure cross in simple white, carven with surpassing art from an iceberg's crystal heart. Here Saint Nick, in royal state, dwells until December late, clips the days at either end, and the nights at each extent. Then, with his attendant sprites, scours the earth on wintry nights, bringing home in well-filled hands children's gifts from many lands. Here are whistles, tops, and toys, meant to gladden little boys, skates and sleds that soon will glide o'er the ice or steep hillside. Here are dolls with flaxen curls, sure to charm the little girls, Christmas books with pictures gay for this welcome holiday. In the court the reindeer wait, fill the sledge with costly freight. As the first faint shadow falls, promptly from his icy halls steps Saint Nick and grasps the rein, and afar in measured time sounds the sleigh bell's silver chime. Like an arrow from the bow speed the reindeer o'er the snow. Onward! Now the loaded sleigh skirts the shores of Hudson's Bay. Onward, till the stunted tree gains a loftier majesty, and the curling smoke wreaths rise under less inclement skies. Built upon a hillside steep lies a city wrapped in sleep. Up and down the lonely street sleepy watchmen pace their beat. Little heeds them Santa Claus, not for him are human laws. With a leap he leaves the ground, scales the chimney at a bound. 5 small stockings hang below, 5 small stockings in a row. From his pocket blithe Saint Nick fills the waiting stockings quick, some with sweetmeats, some with toys, gifts for girls and gifts for boys, mounts the chimney like a bird, and the bells are once more heard. Santa Claus, good Christmas saint, in whose heart no selfish taint findeth place, some homes there be where no stockings wait for thee, homes where sad young faces wear painful marks of want and care, and the Christmas morning brings no fair hope of better things. Can you not some crumbs bestow on these children steeped in woe? Steal a single look of care which their sad young faces wear, from your overflowing store give to them whose hearts are sore? No sad eyes should greet the morn when the infant Christ was born.
Slowly fall the snowflakes, hang the holly high, bright its berries greeting.
A Little Book of Christmas by John Kendrick Bangs, Section 4, The House of the Seven Santas. For once the Weather Bureau had scored a good, clean hit. The bull's-eye was pierced squarely in the middle, and the promised blizzard falling upon the city at noon held the metropolis completely in its grip. Everything in the line of public transportation in and out of the town was tied up so tightly that it did not seem possible that it would ever be unraveled again. The snow was piling waist high upon the streets, and the cutting winds played their fantastic pranks with a chill and cruel persistence. It was with great difficulty that Dobbleigh made his way into the Grand Central Railway Station. Like other suburban commuters at Christmas time, he was heavily laden with bundles of one kind and another. He fairly oozed packages. They stuck out of the pockets of his heavy ulster. A half-dozen fastened together with a heavy cord he carried in his right hand, and some were slung about his shoulders and held there by means of a leathern strap. The real truth was that Dobbleigh had been either too busy or had forgotten the wise resolutions of the autumn, and had failed to do his Christmas shopping early, with the result that now, on Christmas Eve, he was returning to the little Dobbleighs with a veritable Santa Claus's pack, whose contents were designed to delight their eyes in the early hours of the coming morning. It was with a great sense of relief that he entered the vast waiting room of the station, and shook the accumulated snow from his coat, and removed the infant icicles from his eyes, but his joy was short-lived. Making his way to the door, he paused to wish the venerable doorman a Merry Christmas. "Fierce night, Hawkins," he said, as he readjusted his packages. "I shall be glad enough to get home." The old man shook his head dubiously. "I'm afraid you won't enjoy that luxury to night, Mr. Dobley," he said. "We haven't been able to get a train out of here since 1 o'clock, and the way things look now, there won't be any business at this stand for 24 hours, even if we have luck." "What's that?" returned Dobley. "You don't mean to say—" "No trains out to night, sir," said the doorman. "The line's out of commission from here to Buffalo, anyhow, and nobody knows what's going on west of here. The wires are down, and we're completely shut off from the world." Dobley gave a low, long whistle. "By Jove, Hawkins," he muttered ruefully, "that's tough." "Kind of hard on the kiddies, eh?" said the old doorman sympathetically. "Mighty hard," said Dobley, with a catch in his voice. "No chance of anything? Not even a freight?" he went on anxiously. "Couldn't pull a feather through with 30 locomotives," was the disheartening response. "I guess it's the hotel for yours to night, sir." Dobley turned away, and pondered deeply for a few moments. Taking care of himself for the night was not, under the circumstances, a very difficult proposition, for his club was not far away, so that he was not confronted with the uncomfortable prospect of sleeping on the benches of the railway station, but the idea of the little Dobleys not finding their treasures awaiting them on the morrow, to say nothing of the anxiety of Mrs. Dobley over his non-arrival, was, to say the least, disconcerting. "Oh, well," he said philosophically, after going over the pros and cons of the situation carefully, "what's the use of worrying? What must be, and I'll have to make the best of it." He buttoned his heavy coat up snugly about his neck, and, seizing his bundles with a firmer grip, wished the old doorman a good night, and went out again into the storm. 15 minutes later, looking more like a snowman than an ordinary human being, he entered the club, and if it be true that misery finds comfort in company, he was not doomed to go without consolation. There were 5 other fellow sufferers there, trying to make the best of it. "Hello, Dobby!" cried his friend and neighbor Grantham. "What's happened to you? An 18-carat family man spending his Christmas Eve at a club? Shame on you!" "I am duly repentant, Gran," replied Dobley. "But you see, as your neighbor, I felt it my duty to keep an eye on you this night. There are hobgoblins in the air. Why are you not at home in the bosom of your family yourself?" "The walking is too bad," said Grantham. "And besides, that confounded valet of mine forgot to put my snowshoes in my suit case." "They say the river is frozen solid all the way up," put in Billy Ricketts, who is a good deal of a wag, as all old bachelors are apt to be. "Why don't you fellows skate home?" "I tried it," smiled Grantham, "but the wind is blowing down the river, and I live up. I hadn't been going more than 2 hours when I landed on Staten Island." In this way the exiles strove to comfort each other, and on the surface succeeded, but inwardly a very miserable lot they were. Clubs have their attractions, but we have not yet succeeded in developing an institution of that kind which is a fair substitute for the home fireside on a Christmas Eve. Even the most confirmed old bachelor will confess to you that, way down deep in his heart, the comforts of such organizations seem cheerless and cold in contrast to the visions of smiling hearthstones and merry gatherings of happy children that come to them in their dreams. "You've got some bundle there, Dobby," said Grantham, as Dobley relieved himself of his burden of packages. "What are you going to do? Open a department store?" "Ah!" ejaculated Ricketts. "You're a fine fellow to talk. Ought to have seen Gran when he staggered in here an hour ago, Dobby. I thought at first he was a branch office of the American Express Company. Honest, I did. Talk about your bundle trust. Gran had the market cornered." "Well, why shouldn't I have?" demanded Grantham. Haven't I got 5 of the finest kids that ever climbed a Christmas tree?" "Nope," said Dobbleigh with an air of conviction. "Your 5 are dandies, Graham, but you ought to see my 6." "I've seen 'em," said Grantham, "and I'll give every blessed one of 'em honorable mention as high steppers and thoroughbreds, but when it comes to the real thing, well, my 5 are blue ribbon kids, all right, all right." "How you fathers do brag about little things!" snorted Ricketts. "You 2 braggarts can roll your 11 into 1, and the aggregate wouldn't be a marker to what my children would be, if I had any. I've half a mind to give up my state of single blessedness just to show you vainglorious chaps what—" Just what Ricketts was going to show the assembled gathering the world will never be able to do more than guess, for he was not permitted to finish the sentence. It was at this precise point that Dr. Mallerby, shedding snow from his broad, burly figure at every step, staggered into the room, and, with a scant greeting to his friends, hastened to the blazing log fire on the club hearth, and, kneeling before it, began unwrapping a bundle of some size that he too carried in his arms. "What on earth have you got there, Doctor?" cried Ricketts, craning his neck over the newcomer's shoulder. "One of these new character dolls?" "No, Billy, no," said Mallerby, fumbling away at the bundle. "I wish to heaven it were. Can't you see, old man? It's the real thing." "The real what?" said Ricketts, bending lower. "The real thing," returned Mallerby in a low voice. "A poor little tot of a newsboy." "Where on earth did you pick him up?" gasped Ricketts as the others gathered round. "Out of the storm," said Mallerby. "I found him huddled up in the vestibule of Colonel Mortimer's when I came out of the house 10 minutes ago. The poor little devil was curled up almost into a knot, trying to keep warm, and lay there fast asleep, with his papers under his arm. I honestly believe that if I hadn't come out when I did, it would have been too late. This is a fierce storm." "He isn't frozen, is he?" faltered Dobbleigh, as he gazed into the blue little face of the unconscious urchin, a face grimy with the frequent mixture of 2 dirty little fists and his tears. "Not quite," said Mallerby. "I think I got him in time, and he'll pull through, but he had a mighty close call of it. By George, boys, just think of a wee bit of a tot like that, barely more than 6 years old, having to be out on a night like this. Why, the poor little cuss ought to be dreaming of Santa Claus in a nice warm bed somewhere, instead of picking pennies out of these Arctic streets of ours in order to keep body and soul together." Warmed by the glow of the fire, the youngster stirred as the doctor spoke, and a weary little voice, scarce higher than a whisper, broke the stillness of the room. "Extry! Biggest blizzard in 20 years! Extry! Piper, sir?" The 7 sophisticated men of the world, gathered about the prostrate figure, stood silent, and 3 of them turned away, lest the others should see the unmanly moisture of their eyes. "Here, by thunder!" gasped Ricketts, pulling a roll of bills from his pocket. "Hanged if I won't buy the whole edition." "That's all right, Billy," smiled the doctor. "What he needs just now is something less cold than money. We'll take him upstairs and give him a warm bath, fill his little stomach up with milk, and put him to bed, with a nice fuzzy blanket to thaw out his icy little legs." "Splendid!" said Ricketts. "But see here, doctor, I want to be in on this. Isn't there anything I can do to help?" "Yes," said the doctor. "You might make this proceeding regular by putting him up as your guest on a 10-day card." The little bundle of rags and humanity was tenderly carried to the regions above, and under the almost womanly ministrations of Dr. Mallerby was completely restored to cleanliness and warmth. What hunger he might have been conscious of was assuaged by a great bumper of milk, and then in the most sumptuous apartment the club was able to provide, the thawed out little gamin was put to bed. The snowy sheets, The soft, downy pillows and the soul-warming blankets were not needed to lure him into the land of dreams, for the bitter experiences of the earlier hours of the night still weighed heavily upon his eyelids, even if his mind and heart were no longer conscious of them. He presented a most appealing picture as he lay there, after settling back with a deep-drawn sigh of content into the kindly embrace of a bed 7 or 8 sizes too big for him, his little legs scarcely reaching half-way to the middle, and his tousled head of red hair forming a rubricated spot on the milk-white pillow-case as it stuck up out of the bedclothes, and lay comfortably back in what was probably the first soft nest it had known since it lay on its mother's breast, if indeed it had ever known that rare felicity. "There," said the doctor, as the little foundling, with a suspicion of a smile on his pursed-up lips, wandered more deeply into the land of Nod. "I guess he's fixed for the night, anyhow, and the rest of us can go about our business." The 7 men tiptoed softly out of the room, and adjourned to the spacious chambers below, where for an hour they tried to lose themselves in the chaos of bridge. They were all fairly expert players at that noble social obsession, but nobody would have guessed it that night. No party of beginners ever played quite so atrociously, and yet no partner was found sufficiently outraged to be acrimonious. The fact was that not one of them was able to keep his mind on the cards, the thoughts of every one of them reverting constantly to the wan little figure in that upper room. Finally, Dobbleigh, after having reneged twice and trumped his partner's trick more than once, threw down his cards and drew away from the table impatiently. "It's no use, fellows," he said. "I can't keep my eye on the ball. I'm going to bed." "Same here," said Ricketts. "Every blessed face card in this pack, queen, jack, or king, is a red-headed little newsboy to me, and every spade is a heart. It's me for Slumberland." So the party broke up, and within an hour the clubhouse went dark. Dr. Mallerby assumed possession of a single room adjoining that of their little guest, so that he might keep an eye upon his newly acquired patient through the night, and the others distributed themselves about on the upper floors. At midnight all was still as a sylvan dell in the depths of a winter's night, when no sounds of birds or of rustling leaves or of babbling waters break in upon the quiet of the scene. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when Dr. Mallerby was roused suddenly from his sleep by the sound of stealthy footsteps in the adjoining room where the little sleeper lay. He rose hastily from his couch and entered the room, and was much surprised to see, in the dim light of the hall lamp, no less a person than Dobbleigh, acting rather suspiciously, too. "Hello! What are you up to, Dobby?" he queried in a low whisper, as he espied that worthy, clad in a bathrobe of too ample proportions, stealing out of the room. "Why, nothing, Mallerby, nothing," replied Dobbleigh, evidently much embarrassed. I just thought I'd run down and see how the little chap was getting along. I'm something of a father myself, you know." "What's all this?" continued the doctor, as his eye fell upon a number of strange-looking objects spread along the foot of the bed, far beyond the reach of the little toes of the sleeper. A book of rhymes with a gorgeous red cover, a small tin trumpet with a pleasing variety of stops, a box of tin soldiers, and a complete Rough Rider's outfit, sword, cap, leggings, and blouse, not to mention an assortment of other things well calculated to delight the soul of youth. "Why," faltered Dobbleigh, his face turning as red as the flag of anarchy, "you see, I happen to have these things along with me, Mallerby, for my own kiddies, you know, and it sort of seemed a pity not to get some use out of them on Christmas morning, and so well, you know, old man." The hand of the doctor gripped that of the intruder, and he tried to assure him that he did know, but he couldn't. He choked up and was about to turn away when the door began moving slowly upon its hinges once more, and Grantham entered, quite as much after the fashion of the stealthy-footed criminals as Dobbleigh. He, too, carried a variety of packages, and under each arm was a tightly packed golf stocking. He started back as he saw Dobbleigh and the doctor standing by the bedside, but it was too late. They had caught him in the act. "Ah, Grantham," said Dobbleigh with a grin. "Giving an imitation of a second-story man, eh? What are you going to do with those two stuffed clubs? Sandbag somebody?" "Yes," said Grantham sheepishly. "I've had it in for the doctor for some time, and I thought I'd sneak down and give him one while he slept." "All right, Granny," smiled the doctor. "Just hang your clubs on the foot of the bed here, and after I've got to sleep again come in and perpetrate the dastardly deed." "Fact is, boys," said Grantham seriously, "these things I was taking home to my youngsters are going to waste under the circumstances, and I had an idea it wouldn't hurt our guest here to wake up just once to a real Santa Claus feast." "Fine!" said the doctor. "Looks to me as if this youngster had thrown doubles. Dobby here has already fitted him out with a complete army, and various other things too numerous to mention." "Why, look who's here!" cried Dobbleigh, interrupting the doctor as the door swung open a third time, and Seymour appeared, his raiment consisting of a blanket and a pair of carpet slippers, causing him in the dim light to give the impression of an Indian on the war-path. "By Jove, Tommy," he added, "all you need is a tomahawk in one hand and a bunch of wooden cigars in the other to pass for the puller-in of a tobacco shop. What are you after, sneaking in here like old Sitting Bull at this unholy hour of the morning? After the kid's scalp?" "Why, you see, Dobby," replied Seymour, revealing a soft, furry cap and a pair of gloves that looked as if they had just been pulled off the paws of a bear cub, "I happen to be taking these things home for my boy Jim. He's daft on skating, and it's cold as the dickens up at Blairsport, but Jimmy can wait until New Year's for his, I guess. It came over me all of a sudden, while I was trying to get to sleep upstairs, that our honored guest might find them useful." "Look at those chapped little fists," said the doctor. "That's your answer, Seymour." "They're his, all right," said Seymour, sitting on the side of the bed, and comparing the gloves with the red little hands that lay inert on the counterpane. "By Jove," he muttered, as he took one of the diminutive hands in his own, "they're like sandpaper." "Selling papers in winter doesn't give these babies exactly the sort of paddies you'd expect to find on a mollycoddle," said the doctor. And so, here in the house of the Seven Santas, things went for the next hour. One by one all the prisoners of the night, with the exception of Ricketts, dropped in surreptitiously, to find that the ideas of each were common to them all, and the little mite under the bedclothes was destined soon to emerge from the riches of his dreams into a reality even richer and more substantial. The varied gifts were ranged about the foot of the bed, the golf stockings bulging with sweets were hung at its head, and the big-hearted donors retired, this time to that real sleep which comes to him who has had the satisfaction of some kindly deed to look back upon. "Poor Ricketts!" sighed the doctor as he noted the one absentee. "How much these old bachelors lose at this season of the year!" 2 hours later, just as the first rays of the dawn began to light up the guest room, its small occupant opened his eyes and began rubbing them violently with his fists. "Chee!" was his first utterance, and then he sat up and gazed about him. His unfamiliar surroundings naturally puzzled him, and a look of childish wonder came over his face. "Where am I at?" he muttered. "Guess dis must be dat heaven place de guys down to de mission talks about." He clambered out of bed, and as he did so his eyes took in the wondrous array of gifts spread before him. "Well, what do you know about dat?" he muttered. "What kind of a joint is dis, anyhow?" As he attempted to walk across the room, his small feet became entangled in the flowing skirt of Mallerby's bath robe, which he wore in lieu of a night shirt. "Dat's it," he said, as he tripped and stumbled to the floor. "I'm dead. Dat's what I am. And dese is my angel clothes. Gee, but dey's hard to walk in. Seems to me I'd radder have me pants." In a moment he had regained his feet, and the marvelous variety of toys began to reveal themselves in detail to his astonished vision. "Will yer pipe de layout!" he gasped ecstatically. "Wonder what kid's goin' to have de luck to draw dem in his socks." And just then the door opened again, and a sleepy-eyed old bachelor came stealing in the person of Ricketts. He wore his pajamas and a yellow mackintosh thrown over his shoulders. "Good morning, Kitty," he said, closing the door softly behind him. "Merry Christmas to you." "Merry Christmas yourself," smiled the youngster. "Say, mister, kin yer tell me where I'm at? Dis ain't like my reg'lar lodgin' house, and I must have got in wrong somehow." "Where is your regular lodging house?" asked Ricketts, seating himself on the side of the bed. "Oh, any old place where there's room for me and me feet in the same time," replied the boy. "Packin' boxes mostly in de winter time, and the docks in de summer." "But your parents?" demanded Ricketts. "Where are they?" "Me what?" asked the boy. "Your parents your father and mother," explained Ricketts. "I ain't never had no mudder," said the boy. "But me fadder, well, me and him had a scrap over me wages last summer, and I ain't seen him since." "Your wages, eh?" smiled Ricketts. The idea of this little tad earning wages struck him as being rather humorous. "He t'ought I ought to give him de whole wad," said the boy. "And when he licked me for spending a nickel on meself and a friend of mine last 4th of July, I give him de skidoo." "I see," said Ricketts, regarding the little guest with a singular light in his eyes. "You've got a fine lot of stuff here from old Santa Claus, haven't you?" "What? Me?" asked the boy, gazing earnestly into Ricketts' face. "Is dese here tings for me?" "Why, of course," said Ricketts. "Old Daddy Santa Claus on his rounds last night found you occupying a handsome apartment on Fifth Avenue, but the steam heat had been turned off, and fearing you might catch cold, he picked you up and brought you to his own home. He'd been looking for you all day." "And dese is really for me?" cried the child. "Every blessed stick and shred of them," said Ricketts fervently. The boy squatted flat upon the floor, completely staggered by the sudden revelation of his wealth. "Gee!" was all he could think of to say. And then began a romp through a veritable toyland, in which two lonely wanderers through the vales of life had the first taste of joys they had never known before. The red-headed little son of the streets getting the first glimpse of kindness that his starved little soul had ever enjoyed; the confirmed old bachelor finding the only outlet that fate had ever vouchsafed him for those instincts of fatherhood which are the priceless heritage of us all. Small wonder that the play waxed fast, furious, and noisy. The lad, up to this time confronted ever with the pressing necessities of life, developed a capacity for play that was all the more intense for the privations of his limited years, the bachelor finding the dam of his pent-up feelings loosened into an overwhelming flood of pure joyousness. There were cries of joy and shrieks of laughter, and when, with some difficulty, Because of his lack of experience, Ricketts finally succeeded in getting the lad arrayed in his Rough Rider suit, whose buckles and buttons seemed aggravatingly small for hands that had developed nothing but thumbs. The tin trumpet, with all the stops save the one that would silence it even temporarily, was brought into play, and the battles that were fought in the ensuing hour between a noble army of warriors, led by the youngster against himself, as either a Spanish army or a wild Indian tribe, have no equals in the annals of warfare. The morning was pretty well advanced when the other sleeping Santas were aroused from their dreams by the shouts of victory, to be confronted, upon investigation, by a prostrate enemy, in the person of Ricketts, lying face downward upon the floor, with a diminutive Rough Rider standing upon the small of his back, waving a nickel sword in the air, while he blew ear-splitting blasts upon his trumpet to announce the arrival of the conqueror. "Well, well, well!" said Doctor Mallerby with a loud laugh, as he and the others burst into the room. "What's going on? Another San Juan Hill?" "The same," panted Ricketts from his coign of disadvantage. "And I'm the hill. All that remains now is for some of you fellows to hurry up and get a bath towel from somewhere and hoist the flag of truce." The morning passed, and the storm showing some signs of abatement, the exiled men began to cherish hopes of getting home before night. Communication with the railway station elicited the gratifying news that about 4 o'clock in the afternoon a train would be sent forth to carry the marooned suburbanites back to the scenes of their domestic desires. Meanwhile the honored guest received to the full all the attention of which the seven Santas were capable. Only in making up for the lost playtime of the past the guest proved to be untiring, while the seven Santas were compelled now and then to work in relays in order to keep up with the game. Hence it was that at various hours of the day dignified business men were to be seen squatting upon the floor, irrespective of that dignity, running iron cars over tin railway tracks, arranging the serried ranks of tin soldiers in battle array, answering strident summonses to battle sounded on that everlasting tin trumpet, and, strange to say, joining their young friend in feasts of candy and other digestion-destroying sweets which they had forever eschewed long years before. "I suppose I'll suffer for this," said Grantham, as at the command of his superior officer he swallowed the handle of a peppermint walking-stick, after Fletcherizing it carefully for several minutes. "But, by ginger, it's worth it." "You'll be all right, Gran," laughed the doctor. "If worst comes to the worst, I'll blow you to a pony of ipecac, unless you prefer squills." But at last even the strenuous nature of the guest began to show signs of the day's inroads upon his strength, and when the hour for the departure of the suburbanites came shortly before 4, and they all gathered around to bid him their adieus, they were hardly surprised to find him cuddled up on the bearskin rug before the fire, fast asleep, with his tin trumpet hugged tightly to his breast. "We're a great lot," said Dobbleigh suddenly. "We can't all go off and leave him here alone. What the dickens are we going to do?" "Don't bother," said Ricketts from the depths of the lounge, where he had been trying for a few minutes to get a much-needed rest. "I haven't anything on hand, boys. Leave him to me. I'll take care of him." "I move we all meet here to morrow," said Grantham, "and see what's to be done with the kid." Ricketts rose up from the lounge and started to speak, but he was interrupted by the doctor. "Did any of you think to ask the little tad his name?" he inquired. "That's where I come in, boys," said Ricketts. "You needn't bother your heads about his name or his tomorrow. I'll take care of both. You men have provided him with the joys of to day. Pretty substantial joys, too, as those of us who have helped him to enjoy them can testify. As a hearthless old bachelor, bundleless and forlorn, I was unable to qualify on the toy end of things, but when it comes to names, I'll give him one as my contribution to his Christmas possessions." "Good for you, Billy!" laughed Dobbleigh. "Would you mind telling us what it is to be, so that we can put him on our visiting lists?" "Not in the least," returned Ricketts, with an affectionate glance at the boy. "He is to be known henceforth as William Ricketts, Junior." "William Ricketts, Junior!" cried the others, almost in one voice. "Precisely," said Ricketts, turning and facing them. "From now on you fellows will have to quit putting it all over me because you have children and I haven't. I've come into a ready-made family, rather unexpectedly, but there it is. It's mine, and I'm going to keep it. I've been without one too long, and after what I have tasted this day I find that I have acquired a thirst for paternity that can never be cured. Tomorrow I propose to adopt our small guest here, formally, by due process of law." "But where do we come in on this?" cried Grantham. "It's bully of you, old man, but we can't permit you to shoulder the whole burden of this boy's—" "Shut up, Gran," retorted Ricketts, with an affectation of fine scorn. "You and the rest of this bunch are nothing but a lot of blooming uncles. And, by the way, gentlemen," he added, with a courtly bow, "I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for your kindness to my son. Good night." And with that 6 of the exiles passed out into the twilight, and hurried back to their own firesides, leaving Ricketts to his own. And that is why, too, that the club servants, when they came to make their rounds that night, before turning out the lights, were surprised to find old Billy Ricketts lying fast asleep in the warm embrace of one of the richly upholstered arm-chairs of the lounging-room, before the blazing log fire on the hearth, with a mite of a boy curled up in his lap, his little red head snuggled close to the manly chest of his protector, and a happy little smile upon his lips that showed that his dreams were sweet, and that in those arms he felt himself secure from the trials of life. There was that upon the faces of both that gave the watchers pause, and they refrained from waking them, merely turning out the electric lights and tiptoeing softly out of the room, leaving the sleepers bathed in the mellow glow of the dancing flames. 2 lonely hearts had come into their own in the house of the 7 Santas.
A Christmas Sermon by Robert Louis Stevenson. By the time this paper appears, I shall have been talking for 12 months, and it is thought I should take my leave in a formal and seasonable manner. Valedictory eloquence is rare, and deathbed sayings have not often hit the mark of the occasion. Charles II, wit and skeptic, a man whose life has been one long lesson in human incredulity, an easygoing comrade, a maneuvering king, remembered and embodied all his wit and skepticism, along with more than his usual good humor in the famous, "I'm afraid, gentlemen, I'm an unconscionable time a-dying." 1. An unconscionable time a-dying. There's a picture, I'm afraid, gentlemen, of your life and of mine. The sands run out, and the hours are numbered and imputed. And the days go by, and when the last of these finds us, we have been a long time dying. And what else? The very length is something if we reach that hour of separation undishonored, and to have lived at all is doubtless, in the soldierly expression, to have served. There is a tale in Tacitus of how the veterans mutinied in the German wilderness, of how they mobbed Germanicus, clamoring to go home, and of how, seizing their general's hands, these old war-worn exiles passed his finger along their toothless gums. Sunt lacrimae rerum. This is the most eloquent of the songs of Simeon. And when the man has lived to a fair age, he bears his marks of service. He may have never been remarked upon the breach at the head of the army. At least he shall have lost his teeth on the camp bread. The idealism of serious people in this age of ours is of a notable character. It never seems to them that we have served enough. They have a fine impatience of their virtues. It were perhaps more modest to be stingily thankful that we are no worse. It is not only our enemies, those desperate characters. It is we ourselves who know not what we do. Thence springs the glimmering hope that perhaps we do better than we think, that to scramble through this random business with hands reasonably clean, to have played the part of a man or a woman with some reasonable fullness, to have often resisted the diabolic, and at the end to be still resisting it, is for the poor human soldier to have done right well. To ask to see some fruit of our endeavor is but a transcendental way of serving for reward, and what we take to be contempt of self is only greed of higher. And again, if we require so much of ourselves, shall we not require much of others? If we do not genially judge our own deficiencies, is it not to be feared we shall be even stern to the trespasses of others? And he who, looking back on his own life, can see no more than that he has been unconscionably long a-dying, will he not be tempted to think his neighbor unconscionably long of getting hanged? It is probable that nearly all who think of conduct at all think of it too much. It is certain we all think too much of sin. We are not damned for doing wrong, but for not doing right. Christ would never hear of negative morality. Thou shalt was ever his word, with which he superseded thou shalt not. To make our idea of morality center on forbidden acts is to defile the imagination, and to introduce into our judgments of our fellow men a secret element of gusto. If a thing is wrong for us, we should not dwell upon the thought of it, or we shall soon dwell upon it with introverted pleasure. If we cannot drive it from our minds, one thing of two. Either our creed is in the wrong, and we must more indulgently remodel it, or else if our morality be in the right, we are criminal lunatics, and should place our persons in restraint. A mark of such unwholesomely divided minds is the passion for interference with others. The fox without the tail was of this breed, but had, if his biographer is to be trusted, a certain antique civility now out of date. A man may have a flaw, a weakness, that unfits him for the duties of life, that spoils his temper, that threatens his integrity, or that betrays him into cruelty. It has to be conquered, but it must never be suffered to engross his thoughts. The true duties lie all upon the farther side, and must be attended to with a whole mind so soon as this preliminary clearing of the decks has been effected. In order that he may be kind and honest, it may be needful he should become a total abstainer. Let him become so then, and the next day let him forget the circumstance. Trying to be kind and honest will require all his thoughts. A mortified appetite is never a wise companion. Insofar as he has had to mortify an appetite, he will still be the worse man. And of such an one a great deal of cheerfulness will be required in judging life, and a great deal of humility in judging others. It may be argued again that dissatisfaction with our life's endeavor springs in some degree from dullness. We require higher tasks because we do not recognize the height of those we have. Trying to be kind and honest seems an affair too simple and too inconsequential for gentlemen of our heroic mold. We had rather set ourselves to something bold, arduous, and conclusive. We had rather found a schism or suppress a heresy, cut off a hand or mortify an appetite. But the task before us, which is to co-endure with our existence, is rather one of microscopic fineness. And the heroism required is that of patience. There is no cutting of the Gordian knots of life. Each must be smilingly unraveled. To be honest, to be kind, to earn a little and spend a little less, to make upon the whole a family happier for his presence, to renounce when that shall be necessary and not be embittered, to keep a few friends, but these without capitulation above all, on the same grim condition to keep friends with himself. Here is a task for all that a man has of fortitude and delicacy. He has an ambitious soul who would ask more. He has a hopeful spirit who should look in such an enterprise to be successful. There is indeed one element in human destiny that not blindness itself can controvert. Whatever else we are intended to do, we are not intended to succeed. Failure is the fate allotted. It is so in every art and study. It is so above all in the continent art of living well. Here is a pleasant thought for the year's end and for the end of life. Only self-deception will be satisfied, and there need be no despair for the despairer. 2. But Christmas is not the only mile mark of another year moving us to thoughts of self-examination. It is a season from all its associations, whether domestic or religious, suggesting thoughts of joy. A man dissatisfied with his endeavors is a man tempted to sadness. And in the midst of the winter, when his life runs lowest and he is reminded of the empty chairs of his beloved, it is well he should be condemned to this fashion of the smiling face. Noble disappointment, noble self-denial are not to be admired, not even to be pardoned if they bring bitterness. It is one thing to enter the kingdom of heaven maim, another to maim yourself and stay without. And the kingdom of heaven is of the childlike, of those who are easy to please, who love and who give pleasure. Mighty men of their hands, the smiters and the builders and the judges, have lived long and done sternly and yet preserved this lovely character, and among our carpet interests and twopenny concerns, the shame were indelible if we should lose it. Gentleness and cheerfulness, those come before all morality. They are the perfect duties. And it is the trouble with moral men that they have neither one nor the other. It was the moral man, the Pharisee, whom Christ could not away with. If your morals make you dreary, depend upon it they are wrong. I do not say give them up, for they may be all you have, but conceal them like a vice, lest they should spoil the lives of better and simpler people. A strange temptation attends upon man to keep his eye on pleasures even when he will not share in them, to aim all his morals against them. This very year a lady, singular iconoclast, proclaimed a crusade against dolls, and the racy sermon against lust is a feature of the age. I venture to call such moralists insincere. At any excess or perversion of a natural appetite, their lyre sounds of itself with relishing denunciations, but for all displays of the truly diabolic envy, malice, the mean lie, the mean silence, the calumnious truth, the backbiter, the petty tyrant, the peevish poisoner of family life, their standard is quite different. These are wrong, they will admit, yet somehow not so wrong. There is no zeal in their assault on them. No secret element of gusto warms up the sermon. It is for the things not wrong in themselves that they reserve the choicest of their indignation. A man may naturally disclaim all moral kinship with the Reverend Mr. Zola or the hobgoblin old lady of the dolls, for these are gross and naked instances. And yet in each of us some similar element resides. The sight of a pleasure in which we cannot or else will not share moves us to a particular impatience. It may be because we are envious, or because we are sad, or because we dislike noise and romping, being so refined, or because, being so philosophic, we have an overweighing sense of life's gravity. At least, as we go on in years, we are all tempted to frown upon our neighbor's pleasures. People are nowadays so fond of resisting temptations. Here is one to be resisted. They are fond of self-denial. Here is the propensity that cannot be too peremptorily denied. There is an idea abroad among moral people that they should make their neighbors good. One person I have to make good, myself. But my duty to my neighbor is much more nearly expressed by saying that I have to make him happy, if I may. 3. Happiness and goodness, according to canting moralists, stand in relation of effect and cause. There was never anything less proved or less probable. Our happiness is never in our own hands. We inherit our constitution. We stand buffet among friends and enemies. We may be so built as to feel a sneer or an aspersion with unusual keenness, and so circumstanced as to be unusually exposed to them. We may have nerves very sensitive to pain, and be afflicted with a disease very painful. Virtue will not help us, and it is not meant to help us. It is not even its own reward, except for the self-centered and, I had almost said, the unamiable. No man can pacify his conscience. If quiet be what he want, he shall do better to let the organ perish from disuse, and to avoid the penalties of the law and the minor capitis diminuto of social ostracism is an affair of wisdom, of cunning, if you will, and not of virtue. In his own life, then, a man is not to expect happiness, only to profit by it gladly when it shall arise. He is on duty here. He knows not how or why, and does not need to know. He knows not for what hire, and must not ask. Somehow or other, though he does not know what goodness is, he must try to be good. Somehow or other, though he cannot tell what will do it, he must try to give happiness to others. And no doubt there comes in here a frequent clash of duties. How far is he to make his neighbor happy? How far must he respect that smiling face so easy to cloud, so hard to brighten again? How far on the other side is he bound to be his brother's keeper and the prophet of his own morality? How far must he resent evil? The difficulty is that we have little guidance, Christ's sayings on the point being hard to reconcile with each other, and, the most of them, hard to accept. But the truth of his teaching would seem to be this: in our own person and fortune, we should be ready to accept and to pardon all. It is our cheek we are to turn. Our coat we are to give away to the man who has taken our cloak. But when another's face is buffeted, perhaps a little of the lion will become us best. That we are to suffer others to be injured and stand by is not conceivable and surely not desirable. Revenge, says Bacon, is a kind of wild justice. Its judgments at least are delivered by an insane judge. And in our own quarrel we can see nothing truly and do nothing wisely. But in the quarrel of our neighbor, let us be more bold. One person's happiness is as sacred as another's. When we cannot defend both, let us defend one with a stout heart. It is only in so far as we are doing this that we have any right to interfere. The defense of B is our only ground of action against A. A has as good a right to go to the devil as we to go to glory, and neither knows what he does. The truth is that all these interventions and denunciations and militant mongerings of moral half-truths, though they be sometimes needful, though they are often enjoyable, do yet belong to an inferior grade of duties. Ill temper and envy and revenge find here an arsenal of pious disguises. This is the playground of inverted lusts. With a little more patience and a little less temper, a gentler and wiser method might be found in almost every case. And the knot that we cut by some fine, heady quarrel scene in private life, or in public affairs by some denunciatory act against what we are pleased to call our neighbor's vices, might yet have been unwoven by the hand of sympathy. To look back upon the past year, and to see how little we have striven and to what small purpose, and how often we have been cowardly and hung back, or temerarious and rushed unwisely in, and how every day and all day long we have transgressed the law of kindness. It may seem a paradox, but the bitterness of these discoveries, a certain consolation resides. Life is not designed to minister to a man's vanity. He goes upon his long business most of the time with a hanging head, and all the time like a blind child, full of rewards and pleasures as it is, so that to see the day break or the moon rise, or to meet a friend, or to hear the dinner call when he is hungry, fills him with surprising joys. This world is yet for him no abiding city. Friendships fall through, health fails. Weariness assails him. Year after year he must thumb the hardly varying record of his own weakness and folly. It is a friendly process of detachment. When the time comes that he should go, there need be few illusions left about himself. Here lies one who meant well, tried a little, failed much. Surely that may be his epitaph, of which he need not be ashamed. Nor will he complain at the summons which calls a defeated soldier from the field. Defeated, aye, if he were Paul or Marcus Aurelius. But if there is still 1 inch of fight in his old spirit, undishonored, the faith which sustained him in his lifelong blindness and lifelong disappointment will scarce even be required in this last formality of laying down his arms. Give him a march with his old bones. There, out of the glorious sun-colored earth, out of the day and the dust and the ecstasy, there goes another faithful failure. From a recent book of verse, where there is more than one such beautiful and manly poem, I take this memorial piece. It says better than I can what I love to think. Let it be our parting word. A late lark twitters from the quiet skies and from the west, where the sun, his day's work ended, lingers as in content. There falls on the old gray city an influence luminous and serene, a shining peace. The smoke ascends in a rosy golden haze. The spires shine and are changed. In the valley shadows rise. The lark sings on. The sun, closing his benediction, sinks, and the darkening air thrills with a sense of the triumphing night, with her train of stars, and her great gift of sleep. So be my passing, my task accomplished and the long day done, my wages taken, and in my heart some late lark singing. Let me be gathered to the quiet west, the sundown splendid and serene, death.
If you have a book lover in your life, or even someone who's neurodivergent or obsessed with the Wicked musical, come check out our Gumroad shop. We have annotated classics, a neurodivergent planner, and even 9+ hours of The Wizard of Oz as an annotated audiobook. You can find them all on craftlit.gumroad.com. That's craftlit, CraftLit, .gumroad, GUM as in Mary, ROAD as in dog.com. Or you could buy them as a gift. Happy holidays, and take care of yourself, your friends, and your family.
The Night After Christmas by Anne P.L. Field. Recording by Jan McGillivray. 'Twas the night after Christmas in Santa Claus land, and to rest from his labors St. Nicholas planned. The reindeer were turned out to pasture, and all the 10,000 assistants discharged till the fall. The furry greatcoat was laid safely away, with the boots and the cap with its tassel so gay, and toasting his toes by a merry wood fire, what more could a weary old Santa desire? So he puffed at his pipe, and remarked to his wife, "This amply makes up for my strenuous life. From climbing down chimneys my legs fairly ache, but it's well worth the while for the dear children's sake. I'd bruise every bone in my body to see the darlings delight in a gift-laden tree." Just then came a sound like a telephone bell, though why they should have such a thing I can't tell. St. Nick gave a snort, and exclaimed in a rage, "Bad luck to inventions of this modern age!" He grabbed the receiver. His face wore a frown, as he roared in the mouthpiece, "I will not come down to exchange any toys like an up-to-date store. Ring off! I'll not listen to anything more." Then he settled himself by the comforting blaze, and waxed reminiscent of halcyon days, when children were happy with simplest of toys, a doll for the girls, and a drum for the boys. But again came that noisy disturber of peace, the telephone bell. Would the sound never cease? "Run and answer it, wife. All my patience has fled. If they keep this thing up I shall wish I were dead. I have worked night and day the best part of a year to supply all the children, and what do I hear? A boy who declares he received roller skates when he wanted a gun, and a cross girl who states that she asked for a new Victor talking machine, and I brought her a sled so she thinks I am mean." Poor St. Nicholas looked just the picture of woe. He needed some auto-suggestion, you know, to make him think things were all coming out right, for he didn't get one wink of slumber that night. The telephone wire was kept sizzling hot by children disgusted with presents they'd got, and when the bright sun showed its face in the sky, the Santa Claus family were ready to cry. Just then something happened, a way of escape, though it came in the funniest possible shape. An aeronaut, sorely in need of a meal, descended for breakfast. It seemed quite ideal, for the end of it was, he invited his host out to try the balloon, of whose speed he could boast. St. Nick, who was nothing if not a good sport, was delighted to go, and as quick as a thought climbed into the car for a flight in the air. "No telephone bells can disturb me up there. And, wife, if it suits me I'll count it no crime to stay up till ready for next Christmas time." Thus saying, he sailed in the giant balloon, and I fear that he will not return very soon. Now, when you ask Central for Santa Claus land, she'll say, "Discontinued," and you'll understand. End of The Night After Christmas by Anne P.L. Field.
Fireside Christmas Short Stories. Her Birthday Dream by Nellie C. King. Recording by Angela. Marcia Brownlow came out of the church and walked rapidly down the street. She seemed perturbed. Her gray eyes flashed, and on her cheeks glowed 2 red spots. She was glad she was not going home, so she wouldn't have to take a car, but could walk the short distance to Aunt Sophie's, where she had been invited to dine and visit with her special chum, Cousin Jack, who was home from college for the short Thanksgiving vacation. She slowed up as she reached her destination and waited a little before going in. She wanted to get calmed down a bit, for she didn't want her friend to see her when she felt so riled up. Back of it was a secret reluctance to meet Jack. He was so different since the Gypsy Smith revival. Of course, he was perfectly lovely and unchanged toward her, but somehow she felt uncomfortable in his presence, and she didn't enjoy having her self-satisfaction disturbed. As she entered the dining room, she was greeted with exclamations of surprise and pleasure. "Why, Marcia," said Aunt Sophia, "we had given you up. I almost never knew of your being late in keeping an appointment." "You must excuse me, Auntie, and lay this offense to the charge of our Sunday school superintendent," answered Marcia. "I suppose Mr. Robinson is laying his plans for Christmas," remarked Uncle John. "He believes in taking time by the forelock, and a very commendable habit it is, too." "Yes," answered Marcia laconically. Jack glanced at her keenly. "Is there anything new in the Christmas line?" he asked. The gray eyes grew black, and the red spots burned again as Marcia replied, "Well, I should think so. He proposes to turn things topsy-turvy." "My, what does he want to do?" inquired Cousin Augusta. "Oh, he calls it the White Gift Christmas, but the long and short of the matter is that he proposes to turn down Santa Claus and all the old time-honored customs connected with Christmas that are so dear to the hearts of the children, and have the school do the giving. He has a big banner hung up in the Sunday school room bearing the words, 'Gifts for the Christ Child.'" "An excellent idea," exclaimed Uncle John, "but I don't see much of an innovation about that. You have always made the children's giving a part of your Christmas celebration, have you not?" "Certainly," rejoined Marcia. "They have always brought their little gifts for the poor, and that is all right, but this time there are no gifts to the Sunday school at all." "Not even to the primary school?" asked Augusta. "Well," admitted Marcia, "Mr. Robinson gave the children their choice today, whether they would have the old Christmas or the White Gift Christmas, and they all voted for the new idea." "Why then should the children be obliged to have gifts if they don't want them?" laughed Augusta. "Oh, children are always taken with novelty, and Mr. Robinson told it to them in such a way that fancy was captivated, but I don't think they really understood what they were giving up." "Marcia, it seems to me that you are emphasizing the wrong side of the subject, if I understand it aright," said Jack. "Why, do you know about it?" asked Marcia in surprise. "Not much," replied Jack, "but I've read the White Gift story in the Sunday School Times, and the report of the Painesville experiment." "Well, Jack, tell us what you know about this mysterious white gift," commanded his father. "I would rather Marcia should tell it, father. I know so little." "Oh, go on, Jack," urged Marcia. "You can't possibly know less about it than I do, for I confess I was so full of the disappointment of the little ones that the other side of it didn't impress me very much." "Well, as I remember it," said Jack, "the gist of the plan is this, that Christmas is Christ's birthday, and we should make our gifts to him instead of to one another. And the idea of the white gift was suggested by the story of the Persian king named Kubla Khan, who was a wise and good ruler, and greatly beloved. On his birthday his subjects kept what they called the White Feast. This was celebrated in an immense great white banqueting hall, and each one of his subjects brought to their king a white gift to express that the love and loyalty of their hearts was without stain. The rich brought white chargers, ivory, and alabaster. The poor brought white pigeons, or even a measure of rice, and the great king regarded all gifts alike so long as they were white. Have I told it right, cousin?" queried Jack. "Yes, I think so. It is a beautiful thought, I must confess, and might be all right in a large, rich Sunday school, but in a mission school like ours I am sure it will be a failure. It will end in our losing our scholars. I don't believe in taking up new ideas without considering whether they are adapted to our needs or not. But please, dear folkses, don't let us say anything more about it," pleaded Marcia, and so the subject was dropped. That evening, as Jack Thornton bade his cousin good-bye, he placed in her hand a little package, saying, "I'm so sorry, Marcia, that I can't be here for your birthday, but here's my remembrance. Now don't you dare open it before Tuesday, and, dear, you may be sure it is a white gift, and may you have a white birthday." And before she could say a word, he had opened the door and was gone. Touched by his thoughtful gift and his words, she said to herself, "A white birthday! I always have perfectly beautiful birthdays." And so she did, for she was always looking out for other people's birthdays and making much of them, and so she always got the gospel measure. "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together, and running over, shall man give into your bosom." But these thoughts were crowded out by the pressure of things to be done. Father and Mother had gone into the country to visit a sick friend, and the younger brothers and sisters surrounded her and clamored for songs and Bible stories, and as she was a good older sister, she devoted herself to them until their bedtime. Then, turning out the lights, she sat down in an easy chair before the library grate, and yielded herself to the spell of the quiet hour. The strained, irritated nerves relaxed, and a strange, sweet peace stole over her. As she gazed dreamily into the fire, a star seemed to rise out of the glowing coals and beam at her with a beautiful, soft radiance, and the words of the Evangel came into her mind. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding joy, and when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him, and when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. She repeated the words over and over to herself. How simple and restful they were! How direct and genuine and satisfying was this old-time giving! There it was, gifts for the Christ child. They presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. She remembered reading somewhere that the gold represented our earthly possessions, the frankincense typified our service, and the myrrh our suffering for his sake. As she gazed into the fire and mused, she fell asleep, and all these thoughts were woven into the fabric of a dream. And who shall say that God does not speak to his children still in dreams? She dreamed that it was the morning of her birthday. She heard cheery voices in the hall calling out to one another, "This is Marcia's birthday! Wish you many returns of the day!" There was an excited running to and fro between the different rooms, and gleeful exclamations, but no one came near her. She sat up in bed listening, and wondering what it could mean. Why, Mother always came into her room, and folded her to her heart, and said those precious things that only a mother can say, and the children always scrambled to see who should be the first to give Sister a birthday kiss. Were they playing some joke on her? She would be quiet and watch, and so not be taken unawares. Presently they went trooping happily downstairs into the dining room, and she heard Father's voice say, "Good morning, children. I wish you many happy returns of Marcia's birthday." What did it all mean? Was she going crazy? Or were they just trying to surprise her by some novel way of celebrating her birthday? She arose and with trembling fingers dressed herself hastily, and stole softly down the stairs and looked into the dining room. Hush, Father was asking a blessing. He returned thanks for dear Marcia's birthday, and asked that it should be a happy day for them all. Beside each plate save her own were various packages, and these were opened amid ejaculations of surprise and pleasure, and sundry hugs and kisses. After the first burst of happiness had subsided, Marcia braced herself and entered the dining room, saying with forced gaiety, "Good morning, dear ones all." They looked up with blank, unanswering faces and said, "Good morning, Marcia." That was all. But Marcia's heart leaped at the recognition of her presence, for she had begun to fear that she was dead and that it was her spirit that was wandering about. She stooped and kissed her mother, who murmured abstractedly, "Yes, dear," never once looking up from the presents she was examining. With a sinking heart she turned away from her mother, and went and stood behind her father's chair, and leaning over, whispered in his ear, "Dear father, have you forgotten that this is my birthday?" He answered kindly but absent-mindedly, "Why, daughter, am I likely to forget it with all these tokens around me?" And he waved his hand toward the gifts piled around his plate. This was almost more than Marcia could bear, for father was always specially tender and attentive to her on her birthday. She always sat on his knee a while, and he told her what a joy and comfort she was to him, and he always paid her some pretty compliment that made her girlish heart swell with innocent pride, for every girl knows that compliments from one's father are a little sweeter than any others. In vain she hung around, waiting for some clue to this mysterious, unnatural conduct of the family. They were all absorbed in plans for spending this birthday, Marcia's birthday, but no reference whatever was made to what she liked. No one consulted her as to what she wanted to do or to have done. The boys were going skating in the forenoon, the little girls were to invite 4 of their friends to help serve the first dinner in the new doll's house, and in the afternoon father would take them all for an automobile ride into the country to a dear friend's, all but Marcia, who couldn't bear to get into an auto since a terrible accident she had been in a few weeks ago. A troop of her girl friends came in, and in a conventional way wished her many happy returns of the day, and then proceeded to ignore her, and gave gifts to other members of the family. "It is a wonder," thought Marcia bitterly, "that they didn't have a birthday party for Marcia with Marcia left out." And so it went on all through that strange, miserable day. While they were all busy celebrating her birthday, she herself was neglected and ignored. As she sat in the quiet house alone in the twilight, for she had no heart to light the gas, just homesick for the personal love which had characterized all her birthdays and all her home life heretofore, there came a timid knock on the door, and as Marcia opened it, there stood little crippled Joe, one of her scholars in the mission Sunday school. As he saw her, he gave a little exclamation of surprise and delight and said, "Oh, Miss Marshie, I hearn last night 'twas your birthday today, and I wanted to guv yer something white, like Mr. Robinson he told us about, don't yer know? And 'cause yer has allus treated me so white, and I didn't have nothin', and so I axed him, you know, what yer telled us about in Sunday school, Jesus who died on the cross, and who's allers willin' to help a poor feller, and I axed him to help me get something real nice and white for your birthday, and I kept me eyes peeled all day expectin' it, and just now a real swell feller buyed a paper of me, and then he guv me this here bunch of white sweet-smellin' posies thout my sayin' a word. Here they be, Miss Marshie, for yer. Jiminy, teacher, ain't them purty? And oh, teacher, he made 'em in the fust place, and had the man guv 'em to me, and so I reckon he and me's partners in this here white gift business." And he held up in his thin, grimy hand a bunch of white, sweet-scented violets. Marcia's first impulse was to catch up the little fellow and his gift in her arms and baptize them with a flood of tears from her own overcharged heart. But she hadn't taught boys in a mission Sunday school class for nothing. Joe would have thought she had gone crazy, or been struck silly, or was sick unto death. So she controlled herself, and kneeling beside him took the violets reverently in both her hands, saying in a choked voice, "Joe, they are just beautiful. This is the only really truly white gift I have had today, and I don't deserve it, but I thank him and you." The boy looked at her with shining face, drew his hand across his eyes, and then answered brightly, "Oh, that's all right, Miss Marshie. 'T any rate 'tis with me, and I reckon 'tis with him." And seizing his crutch, he hopped like a little sparrow through the door and onto the street, and she heard his boyish voice calling out, "Evening papers, last edition, all about the big graft exposure." Just then the big white touring car discharged its merry load at the door, and the house was filled with the chatter and laughter of the children. In vain she tried to find a quiet corner where she could be alone with her heart. It was impossible to escape from the hilarious celebration of her birthday. She was so glad when the children said good night and went off to bed, and she could seek the quiet of her own room. As she bade her father good night, he said, "Well, daughter, I hope you have enjoyed your birthday and all your gifts." At this, all the honesty of her nature, all the hatred of sham, rose up in one indignant outburst, and she exclaimed, "I have had no gifts, neither has this been my birthday celebration." "Why, Marcia," said her father in an aggrieved tone, "this certainly is your birthday, and we have been very happy in keeping it for love of you." "I have failed to see any manifestation of love to me," retorted Marcia. "You may have had a happy time, but I have not been in it. You have given gifts to one another, but I have had just one," and she held up the bunch of violets. "This is a gift of love from little lame Joe in answer to his prayer and in pity for my hungry heart." There was silence in the room for a moment, and then her father answered, "It seems to me, daughter, that when you get right down to a personal application, what you believe in after all is a white birthday." The words went through her like an electric shock, and with a start she awoke and sat upright in her chair, and lo, it was all a dream. Marcia looked around the room, shook herself a little, stirred the fire, and put on fresh coal. She laughed at the remembrance of her dream and its absurdity. How glad she was that it was only a dream. But was it only a dream? Was it not a reality? Was not this the way she had kept the Lord's birthday? When she had opened her Christmas treasure, how much had been given him, and for love of him? How large a place had she given him in the season's activity? Had she ever made room for him as the central figure of it all, or had he been crowded out, and his rightful place given to Santa Claus and the world's merrymaking? In the light of the Spirit she saw that the Star of Bethlehem always leads to the cross of Calvary. She had never liked to think about the cross before, but now it was all illumined with the glory of the love which gave to us God's best, his only begotten Son. She remembered how the Lord Jesus had said, "If I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto me." She saw that it is as we see Christ on the cross for us that we are drawn to him. In that still hour, on her knees at the foot of the cross, Marcia, with great gladness, made her first white gift unto her Lord. She gave herself to him. End of Her Birthday Dream by Nellie C. King.
Palace of St. Nicholas, in the moon, Christmas morning. My dear Susie Clemens, I have received and read all the letters which you and your little sister have written me by the hand of your mother and your nurses. I have also read those which you little people have written me with your own hands. For although you did not use any characters that are in grown people's alphabet, you used the characters that all children in all lands on earth, and in the twinkling stars use. And as all my subjects in the moon are children, and use no characters but that, you will easily understand that I can read your and your baby sister's jagged and fantastic marks without any trouble at all. But I had trouble with those letters which you dictated through your mother and the nurses, for I am a foreigner and cannot read English writing well. You will find that I made no mistakes about the things which you and the baby ordered in your own letters. I went down your chimney at midnight when you were asleep and delivered them all myself, and kissed both of you too, because you are good children, well-trained, nice-mannered, and about the most obedient little people I ever saw. But in the letter which you dictated there were some words which I could not make out for certain, and one or two small orders which I could not fill because we ran out of stock. Our last lot of kitchen furniture for dolls has just gone to a very poor little child in the North Star way up in the cold country above the Big Dipper. Your mamma can show you that star, and you will say Little Snowflake, for that is the child's name. I'm glad you got that furniture, for you need it more than I. That is, you must write that with your own hand, and Snowflake will write you an answer. If you only spoke it, she wouldn't hear you. Make your letter light and thin, for the distance is great and the postage very heavy. Now, there was a word or two in your mamma's letter which I couldn't be certain of. I took it to be a trunk full of doll's clothes. Is that it? I will call at your kitchen door about 9 o'clock this morning to inquire. But I must not see anybody, and I must not speak to anybody but you. When the kitchen doorbell rings, George must be blindfolded and sent to open the door. Then he must go back to the dining room or the china closet and take the cook with him. You must tell George he must walk on tiptoe and not speak. Otherwise he will die some day. Then you must go up to the nursery and stand on a chair or the nurse's bed and put your ear to the speaking tube that leads down to the kitchen. And when I whistle through it, you must speak in the tube and say, "Welcome, Santa Claus." Now then I will ask whether it was a trunk you ordered or not. If you say it was, I shall ask you what color you want the trunk to be. Your mamma will help you to name a nice color, and then you must tell me every single thing in detail which you want the trunk to contain. And then when I say goodbye and Merry Christmas to my little Susie Clemens, you must say goodbye, good old Santa Claus. I thank you very much, and please tell that little snowflake I will look at her star tonight, and she must look down here. I'll be right in the West Bay window, and every fine night I will look out at her star and say, I know somebody up there and like her too. Then you must go down into the library and make George close all the doors that open into the main hall, and everybody must keep still for a little while. I will go to the moon and get those things, and in a few minutes I'll come down the chimney that belongs to the fireplace that is in the hall. If it is a trunk you want, because I couldn't get such a thing as a trunk down the nursery chimney, you know. Now, people may talk if they want until they hear my footsteps in the hall. Then you tell them to keep quiet a little while till I go back up the chimney. Maybe you will not hear my footsteps at all, so you may go now and then and peep through the dining room doors, and by you will see that thing which you want right under the piano in the drawing room, for I shall put it there. If I should leave any snow in the hall, you must tell George to sweep it into the fireplace, for I haven't time to do such things. George must not use a broom but a rag, else he will die some day. You must watch George and not let him run into danger. If my boot should leave a stain on the marble, George must not hollystone it away. Leave it there always, in memory of my visit. And whenever you look at it or show it to anybody, you must let it remind you to be a good little girl. Whenever you are naughty and somebody points to that mark which your good old Santa Claus's boot made on the marble, what will you say, little sweetheart? Well, goodbye for a few minutes till I come down to the world and ring the kitchen doorbell. Your loving Santa Claus, whom people sometimes call the Man in the Moon.
Children's Book of Christmas Stories, The Philanthropist's Christmas by James Weber Lynn. "Did you see this committee yesterday, Mr. Matthews?" asked the philanthropist. His secretary looked up. "Yes, sir." You recommend them, then? Yes, sir. For 50,000. For 50,000, yes, sir. Their corresponding subscriptions are guaranteed? I went over the list carefully, Mr. Carter. The money is promised, and by responsible people. Very well, said the philanthropist. You may notify them, Mr. Matthews, that my 50,000 will be available as the bills come in. Yes, sir. Old Mr. Carter laid down the letter he had been reading and took up another. As he perused it, his white eyebrows rose in irritation. Mr. Matthews, he snapped. Yes, sir. You are careless, sir. I beg your pardon, Mr. Carter? Questioned the secretary, his face flushing. The old gentleman tapped impatiently the letter he held in his hand. Do you pay no attention, Mr. Matthews, to my rule that no personal letters containing appeals for aid are to reach me? How do you account for this, may I ask? I beg your pardon, said the secretary again. You will see, Mr. Carter, that this letter is dated 3 weeks ago. I have had the woman's case carefully investigated. She is undoubtedly of good reputation and undoubtedly in need, and as she speaks of her father as having associated with you, I thought perhaps you would care to see her letter. 1,000 worthless fellows associated with me, said the old man harshly. In a great factory, Mr. Matthews, a boy works alongside of men he is put with. He does not pick and choose. I dare say this woman is telling the truth. What of it? You know that I regard my money as a public trust. Were my energy, my concentration, to be wasted by innumerable individual assaults, what would become of them? My fortune would slip through my fingers as unprofitably as sand. You understand, Mr. Matthews? Let me see no more individual letters. You know that Mr. Whitemore has full authority to deal with them. May I trouble you to ring? I'm going out. A man appeared very promptly in answer to the bell. Sniffen, my overcoat, said the philanthropist. It is, sir, answered Sniffen, helping the thin old man into the great fur folds. There is no word of the dog, I suppose, Sniffen? None, sir. The police was here again yesterday, sir, but they said as ow. The police. The words were fierce with scorn. 8,000 incompetents. He turned abruptly and went toward the door, where he halted a moment. Mr. Matthews, since that woman's letter did reach me, I suppose I must pay for my carelessness. Or yours. Send her, what does she say, 4 children? Send her $100, but for my sake send it anonymously. Write her that I pay no attention to such claims, he went on, and Sniffen closed the door behind him. Takes loosen the little dog 'ard, don't he? Remarked Sniffen sadly to the secretary. I'm afraid there ain't a chance of finding him now. He ain't been stole, nor he ain't been found, or they'd have brung him back for the reward. He's been knocked on the head like as not. He wasn't much of a dog to look at, you see, just a pup. I'd call him, and after he learned that trick of slipping his collar off, well, I fancy Mr. Carter seen the last of him. I do indeed. Mr. Carter, meanwhile, was making his way slowly down the snowy avenue, upon his accustomed walk. The walk, however, was dull today, for Skiddles, his little terrier, was not with him to add interest and excitement. Mr. Carter had found Skiddles in the country a year and a half before. Skiddles, then a puppy, was at the time in a most undignified and undesirable position, stuck in a drain tile and unable either to advance or to retreat. Mr. Carter had shoved him forward after a heroic struggle, whereupon Skiddles had licked his hand. Something in the little dog's eye or his action had induced the rich philanthropist to bargain for him and buy him at a cost of $50. Thereafter Skiddles became his daily companion, his chief distraction, and finally the apple of his eye. Skiddle was of no known parentage, hardly of any known breed, but he suited Mr. Carter. What the millionaire reflected with a proud cynicism were his own antecedents, if it came to that. But now Skiddles had disappeared. As Sniffen said, he had learned the trick of slipping free from his collar. One morning the great front doors had been left open for 2 minutes while the hallway was aired. Skiddles must have slipped down the marble steps unseen and dodged round the corner. At all events, he had vanished, and although the whole police force of the city had been roused to secure his return, it was aroused in vain. And for 3 weeks, therefore, a small, straight, white-bearded man in a fur overcoat had walked in mournful irritation alone. He stood upon a corner uncertainly. One way led to the park, and this he usually took. But today he did not want to go to the park. It was too reminiscent of Skittles. He looked the other way. Down there, if one went far enough, lay slums, and Mr. Carter hated the sight of slums. They always made him miserable and discontented. With all his money and his philanthropy, was there still necessity for such misery in the world? Worse still came the intrusive question at times, had all his money anything to do with the creation of this misery? He owned no tenements. He paid good wages in every factory. He had given sums such as few men have given in the history of philanthropy. Still, there were the slums. However, the worst slums lay some distance off, and he finally turned his back on the park and walked on. It was the day before Christmas. You saw it in people's faces. You saw it in the holly wreaths that hung in windows. You saw it even as you passed the splendid, forbidding houses on the avenue, in the green that here and there banked massive doors. But most of all, you saw it in the shops. Up here the shops were smallish and chiefly of the provision variety, so there was no bewildering display of gifts, but there were Christmas trees everywhere of all sizes. It was astonishing how many people in that neighborhood seemed to favor the old-fashioned idea of a tree. Mr. Carter looked at them with his irritation softening. If they made him feel a trifle more lonely, they allowed him to feel also a trifle less responsible, for after all, it was a fairly happy world. At this moment he perceived a curious phenomenon a short distance before him. Another Christmas tree, but one which moved, apparently of its own volition, along the sidewalk. As Mr. Carter overtook it, he saw that it was borne, or dragged, rather by a small boy who wore a bright red flannel cap and mittens of the same peculiar material. As Mr. Carter looked down at him, he looked up at Mr. Carter and spoke cheerfully. "Going my way, mister?" "Why," said the philanthropist, somewhat taken back, "I was." "Mind dragging this a little way?" asked the boy confidently. "My hands is cold." "Won't you enjoy it more if you manage to take it home by yourself?" "Oh, it ain't for me," said the boy. "Your employer," said the philanthropist severely, "is certainly careless if he allows his trees to be delivered in this fashion." "I ain't delivering it either," said the boy. "This is Bill's tree." "Who's Bill?" "He's a feller with a back that's no good." "Is he your brother?" "No. Take the tree a little way, will you, while I warm myself?" The philanthropist accepted the burden. He did not know why. The boy, released, ran forward, jumped up and down, slapped his red flannel mittens on his legs, and then ran back again. After repeating these maneuvers 2 or 3 times, he returned to where the old gentleman stood holding the tree. "Thanks," he said. "Say, mister, you look like Santa Claus yourself, standing by the tree, with your fur cap and your coat. I bet you don't have to run to keep warm, hey?" There was high admiration in his look. Suddenly his eyes sparkled with an inspiration. "Say, mister," he cried, "will you do something for me? Come into Bill's. He lives only a block from here, and just let him see you. He's only a kid, and he'll think he's seen Santa Claus, sure. We can tell him you're so busy tomorrow you have to go to lots of places today. You won't have to give him anything. We're looking out for all that. Bill got hurt in the summer, and he's been in bed ever since. So we're giving him a Christmas, tree and all. He gets a bunch of things, an air gun and a train that goes round when you wind her up. They're great." "You boys are doing this?" "Well, it's our club at the settlement, and of course Miss Gray thought of it, and she's given Bill the train. Come along, mister." But Mr. Carter declined. "All right," said the boy. "I guess, what with Pete and all, Bill will have Christmas enough." "Who's Pete?" "Bill's dog. He's had him 3 weeks now. Best little pup you ever saw." A dog which Bill had had 3 weeks, and in a neighborhood not a quarter of a mile from the avenue. It was 3 weeks since Skittles had disappeared. That this dog was Skittles was of course most improbable, and yet the philanthropist was ready to grasp at any clue which might lead to the lost terrier. "How did Bill get this dog?" he demanded. "I found him myself. Some kids had tin-canned him, and he came into our entry. He licked my hand and then sat up on his hind legs. Somebody taught him that, you know. I thought right away, here's a dog for Bill, and I took him over there and fed him, and they kept him in Bill's room 2 or 3 days so he shouldn't get scared again and run off. And now he wouldn't leave Bill for anybody. Of course, he ain't much of a dog, Pete ain't," he added. "He's just a pup, but he's mighty friendly." "Boys," said Mr. Carter, "I guess I'll just go round and—" He was about to add, "have a look at that dog," but fearful of raising suspicion, he ended, "and see Bill." The tenements to which the boy led him were of brick and reasonably clean. Nearly every window showed some sign of Christmas. The tree bearer led the way into a dark hall, up one flight, Mr. Carter assisting with the tree, and down another dark hall to a door, on which he knocked. A woman opened it. "Here's the tree," said the boy in a loud whisper. "Is Bill's door shut?" Mr. Carter stepped forward out of the darkness. "I beg your pardon, madam," he said. "I met this young man in the street, and he asked me to come here and see a playmate of his, who is, I understand, an invalid. But if I am intruding—" "Come in," said the woman heartily, throwing the door open. "Bill will be glad to see you, sir." The philanthropist stepped inside. The room was decently furnished and clean. There was a sewing machine in the corner, and in both the windows hung wreaths of holly. Between the windows was a clear space where evidently the tree, when decorated, was to stand. "Are all the things here?" eagerly demanded the tree bearer. "They're all here, Jimmy," answered Mrs. Bailey. "The candy just came." "Say," cried the boy, pulling off his red flannel mittens to blow on his fingers, "won't it be great? But now Bill's got to see Santa Claus. I'll just go in and tell him, and then when I holler, mister, you come on and pretend you're Santa Claus." And with incredible celerity the boy opened the door at the opposite end of the room and disappeared. "Madam," said Mr. Carter, in considerable embarrassment, "I must say one word. I am Mr. Carter, Mr. Allen Carter. You may have heard of my name?" She shook her head. "No, sir." "I live not far from here on the avenue. 3 weeks ago I lost a little dog that I valued very much. I have had all the city searched since then, in vain. Today I met the boy who has just left us. He informed me that 3 weeks ago he found a dog which is at present in the possession of your son. I wonder, is it not just possible that this dog may be mine?" Mrs. Bailey smiled. "I guess not, Mr. Carter. The dog Jimmy found hadn't come off the avenue, not from the look of him. You know there's hundreds and hundreds of dogs without homes, sir, but I will say for this one he has a kind of way with him." "Hark!" said Mr. Carter. There was a rustling and a snuffing at the door at the far end of the room, a quick scratching of feet. Then woof, woof, woof! Sharp and clear came happy, impatient little barks. The philanthropist's eyes brightened. "Yes," he said, "that is the dog." "I doubt if it can be, sir," said Mrs. Bailey deprecatingly. "Open the door, please," commanded the philanthropist, "and let us see." Mrs. Bailey complied. There was a quick jump, a tumbling rush, and Skiddles, the lost Skiddles, was in the philanthropist's arms. Mrs. Bailey shut the door with a troubled face. "I see it's your dog, sir," she said, "but I hope you won't be thinking that Jimmy or I—" "Madam," interrupted Mr. Carter, "I would not be so foolish. On the contrary, I owe you 1,000 thanks." Mrs. Bailey looked more cheerful. "Poor little Billy," she said. "It'll come hard on him, losing Pete just at Christmas time. But the boys are so good to him I dare say he'll forget it." "Who are these boys?" inquired the philanthropist. "Isn't their action somewhat unusual?" "It's Miss Gray's club at the settlement, sir," explained Mrs. Bailey. "Every Christmas they do this for somebody. It's not charity. Billy and I don't need charity, or take it. It's just friendliness. They're good boys." "I see," said the philanthropist. He was still wondering about it, though, when the door opened again and Jimmy thrust out a face shining with anticipation. "All ready, mister," he said. "Bill's waiting for you." "Jimmy," began Mrs. Bailey, about to explain. The gentleman, but the philanthropist held up his hand, interrupting her. "You'll let me see your son, Mrs. Bailey?" he asked gently. "Yes, certainly, sir." Mr. Carter put Skiddles down and walked slowly into the inner room. The bed stood with its side toward him. On it lay a small boy of 7, rigid of body, but with his arms free and his face lighted with joy. "Hello, Santa Claus," he piped, in a voice shrill with excitement. "Hello, Bill," answered the philanthropist sedately. The boy turned his eyes on Jimmy. "He knows my name," he said with glee. "He knows everybody's name," said Jimmy. "Now you tell him what you want, Bill, and he'll bring it tomorrow." "How would you like," said the philanthropist reflectively, "an And he hesitated. It seemed so incongruous with that stiff figure on the bed. An air gun? I guess yes, said Bill happily. And a train of cars, broke in the impatient Jimmy, that goes like 60 when you wind her. Hi, said Bill. The philanthropist solemnly made notes of this. How about, he remarked inquiringly, a tree? Honest, said Bill. I think it can be managed, said Santa Claus. He advanced to the bedside. I'm glad to have seen you, Bill. You know how busy I am, but I hope to see you again. Not till next year, of course, warned Jimmy. Not till then, of course, assented Santa Claus. And now, goodbye. You forgot to ask him if he'd been a good boy, suggested Jimmy. I have, said Bill. I've been fine. You ask Mother. She gives you both a high character, said Santa Claus. Goodbye again. And so saying, he withdrew. Skiddles followed him out. The philanthropist closed the door of the bedroom and then turned to Mrs. Bailey. She was regarding him with awestruck eyes. "Oh, sir," she said, "I know now who you are, the Mr. Carter that gives so much away to people." The philanthropist nodded deprecatingly. "Just so, Mrs. Bailey," he said, "and there is one gift, or loan rather, which I should like to make to you. I should like to leave the little dog with you till after the holidays. I'm afraid I'll have to claim him then, but if you'll keep him till after Christmas and let me find perhaps another dog for Billy, I shall be much obliged." Again the door of the bedroom opened, and Jimmy emerged quietly. "Bill wants the pup," he explained. "Pete, Pete," came the piping but happy voice from the inner room. Skiddles hesitated. Mr. Carter made no sign. "Pete, Pete," shrilled the voice again. Slowly, very slowly, Skiddles turned and went back into the bedroom. "You see," said Mr. Carter, smiling, "he won't be too unhappy away from me, Mrs. Bailey." On his way home the philanthropist saw even more evidence of Christmas gaiety along the streets than before. He stepped out briskly. In spite of his 68 years, he even hummed a little tune. When he reached the house on the avenue, he found his secretary still at work. "Oh, by the way, Mr. Matthews," he said, "did you send that letter to the woman saying I never paid attention to personal appeals?" "No." "Then write her, please, enclosing my check for $200, and wish her a very Merry Christmas in my name, will you? And hereafter will you always let me see such letters as that one? Of course, after careful investigation. I fancy perhaps I may have been too rigid in the past." "Certainly, sir," answered the bewildered secretary. He began fumbling excitedly for his notebook. "I found the little dog," continued the philanthropist. "You will be glad to know that." "You have found him?" cried the secretary. "Have you got him back, Mr. Carter? Where was he?" "He was detained on Oak Street, I believe," said the philanthropist. "No, I have not got him back yet. I have left him with a young boy till after the holidays." He settled himself to his papers, for philanthropists must toil even on the 24th of December. But the secretary shook his head in a daze. "I wonder what's happened," he said to himself. End of The Philanthropist's Christmas by James Weber Lynn. Recording by Elisa McCaslin.
"'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave the lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. "Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all."
As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes how they twinkled, his dimples how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed, like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him, in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy what we do at CraftLit and want to listen to more of our audio, feel free to visit us at our Gumroad shop and check out all our premium annotated books. Charles Dickens's Bleak House, for example, has more than 40 hours worth of annotated audiobook. We are not joking. If this is something you're interested in, go to craftlit.gumroad.com. That's CRAFTLIT.gumroad, G-U-M as in Mary, R-O-A-D as in dog.com to access our premium books or buy them as a gift. Happy holidays. If you enjoy what we do here on CraftLit, please don't forget to like and subscribe on iTunes. Give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button on YouTube. You can also support the show by subscribing to the CraftLit App Premium feed. You can check the link below for details. Your support helps keep CraftLit going strong, and we've got plenty of ways for you to get involved now. If you want more perks, you can head over to Patreon at patreon.com/craftlit and become a patron of this art. You can also join our YouTube channel memberships for access to tons of premium books as bonuses, or you can support us at ko-fi.com/craftlit. And guess what? We've just relaunched our premium memberships over on craftlit.com. Go to craftlit.com/premium and check out all of the details there. Link is below as well. For a one-stop shop to all things CraftLit, please visit Linktree at linktr.ee/CraftLit channel. This is your go-to hub for all of our social media and more. They're all listed there for you. And I keep forgetting to mention, come join our Facebook group. It is full of the kindest, most creative makers and readers, and even some people who never really used to read. We've got them now. All right, that's it for now. Thank you. Take care of yourself. Have a great one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.